Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto has Mokuton and chakra chains. Before I start, please support for more amazing content, and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Harem Purist and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Dear Mito, I hope that this letter finds you well and secure, though I have taken precaution for the latter. I apologize for all of the security measures, but you'll find shortly that the measures involved are no less than absolute necessary. I don't doubt you've been privy to the turmoil plaguing our village, and I fear our struggles won't end anytime soon. Located where our village is, we Uzumaki have always needed a keen sense of trouble brewing on the horizon. I'm already aware that Konoha's forces are spread thin, too thin to assist us should the trouble stirring reach our coasts. I believe it's become prudent to not just take measures to protect our home, but to protect the future of our clan. Lately I've come upon a discovery that I've sought since my youth, some 50 years ago, well into my 6th decade. I believe I've found a way to recreate bloodlines, with our sealing techniques. These measures, Uzushio's contingency plans, will see our next generation woven across the elemental nations. With each child departing, I intend to leave with one of these Kekkai Genkai seals. However, particularly with the seal I leave in your care, there are some things you should know. While I understand that Kushina is soon to take your burden, and while the gift I'm leaving for Konoha within this letter would help her immensely with restraining the bijou soon to be sealed within her, I'm afraid it's not to be. This seal must be used while a child still resides within its mother, and so I suppose the future of the Mokuton rests in the hands of Kushina's children should she have them. 2. Mokuton, as I'm sure you're familiar with, is a bloodline that has only ever appeared once. I believe that in part, it's yet to manifest among other senju due to the necessity of incredibly strong yang chakra. This is partially the reason I leave the seal to you and Kushina, as both of you possess a vitality rarely seen even in our clan. It's my hope that Kushina's potential children will inherit this vitality, else I'm not certain they'll be able to utilize their inheritance. 3. I believe it would be best to keep this a secret, hidden from everyone but yourself and the Sandaime Hokage. I do trust Hiruzen, but I fear for the potential that it becomes common knowledge that any children Kushina may bear have the famed would release, even if they are unfamiliar with how it came to be. Condemning any child to a life as breeding stock should be utterly unthinkable, but you know as well as I do that there are powers intent on doing anything to keep it. 4. The seal you see below is not entirely complete. I've left instructions to finalize the seal, and made certain the final steps are complex, so that only an accomplished seal master could finalize it. While it's not perfect, I do believe it's prohibitive enough to keep most from making use of it, even if our communications are intercepted. At any rate, I do hope that the need to send Uzumaki across the elemental nations turns out unnecessary, but my gut tells me otherwise. Should this indeed turn out to be Yuzu's final parting gift to Konoha, I only ask that you continue to instill our traditions into Kushina, so that perhaps one day she can pass on more than the wood release. P.S. Naruto Uzumaki found himself painfully bored. In the relatively chilly autumn of Hai no Kunien, so far as the aptly named Land of Fire could be called chilly, he found himself wandering aimlessly. Or, at least, mostly aimlessly. Although he was never really allowed to participate lest a parent snatch their child away, or even scold him for assuming he could associate with other kids his age. It wasn't uncommon to find the 4-year-old hanging out around any of Konoha's parks. It made him feel bitter sometimes, but he longed for human contact so thoroughly that even watching and fantasizing about playing with other kids had to be enough. He watched as a pair of children played on the swings, an onyx-haired girl and her older sister, both bearing an odd symbol on their back that he'd seen among Konoha's law enforcement. It seemed like a silly thought, really. Were 2 girls so young a part of the police, or did the symbol bear some other significance he was unaware of? He sighed wistfully. Of all of the park's attractions, he enjoyed the swings most of all, because he could at least get some momentum going all on his lonesome. It was really just a shame that he only ever had the opportunity to use it after everyone else had departed, that his time would be limited, until the sun departed the sky, and one of the animal masked ANBU came to direct him to his empty apartment. His chest felt tight, and so he turned away, wandering into the more heavily forested area of the park situated near the boundary of the village. Unbeknownst to him, his senses had always been just a tad keener than most. It was no wonder that he picked up on a strangled sob, or the jeering of children. He hardly had time to process the stimulus before his feet took him, because, really, what more did he need? Someone was crying. How could he allow that? The scene he came upon was one that boiled his blood. 3 older boys surrounded a girl that seemed to be his age. Not so high and mighty now, are you, Hyuga? The eldest sneered, his fist balled tight. Naruto wasn't sure whether or not it was that fist that brought the girl to her hands and knees in the first place, but he wasn't going to wait and see if the boy would repeat such a dire mistake. Hey, what are you doing? He yelled, storming toward them with all the speed his little legs could muster, although the scarf fluttering in the chilly wind hardly aided in his attempt at an intimidating visage. Unfortunately, it wasn't until he was near nose to nose with the older boy that he realized he'd forgotten one critical bit of information. He was 4. He had no idea how to fight. Back out of the way, idiot. The eldest grunted, his hand coming down to grip Naruto by his hair and shove him aside. You have no chance against us, we're academy students. The way his scalp throbbed, and the smugness in the boy's tone only served to aid the rage swelling in the blonde-haired boy's chest. Besides, when you're older, you'll understand. Us civilians should stick together. It's the only way the lower class survives. He hesitated after his tirade, when one of the younger boys brought a hand to his shoulder. Hey. Nikishimi, that's him. It's that kid. It took a moment for recognition to flash in the ringleader's eyes, but when it did, the smile he suddenly donned never reached his cold eyes. Never mind, he growled, stepping toward him. Naruto tried to scramble back, his building anger lost for the fear now rattling his chest. I take it back. You're not one of us, you just pretend to be. You're a no-good, snot-nosed little dem. His rising tone and cocked back fist culminated together, uttering the word and aiming for a strike at the cowering child all in one beat. P.S. Mokuton is a harder nut to crack than most. I imagine, in some part, that a prerequisite to controlling nature is being one with it. It's for that reason that I've included a secondary component, a little something that should help whomever inherits the effects of this Mokuton seal slowly regulate their consumption of natural energy as they age. I call this component the Sage Seal. Naruto's eyes slammed shut, preparing for the worst. His heart beat faster, and his blood raced through his veins, though all at the same time there was an odd sense of calm that washed over him. When the punch refused to reach him, his eyes peeked open, and then wider in amazement. How was the boy moving so slow? It was like the world had found itself moving through molasses, and the punch seemed to take an eternity to connect the last few inches. Naruto didn't understand his own strength. He sidestepped in the blink of an eye, and the older boy's shock hadn't even registered before a tiny fist was buried in his stomach, and he flew, clearing the ground for a few meters before he landed on the ground and rolled to a stop, cradling his stomach and trying to recover his breath. His friends were near speechless, although 2 words, one from each, seemed to summarize their thoughts. Strong, fast. The look they fixed him with was horror, and they went to recover their fallen friend and scurry away. When the calm dissipated, he was left excitable and trembly. It was annoying that his hands shook so heavily, but the rush couldn't be denied. How had he? Taking a deep breath, his original goal was not forgotten, as he found himself hurrying to the girl that drew him into all of this strangeness in the first place. She wasn't crying anymore, which was a marked improvement, but her pale eyes were wide and confused. How did you? He never was one to beat around the bush. I dunno, he admitted, offering her a hand and helping her up when she timidly accepted the gesture. It was the truth, he didn't really have an explanation. He was fast, of course. He's known that the strange animal-masked people that watched him sometimes have had to kick themselves into a higher gear to keep up with him. It would be gross exaggeration to suggest they had trouble doing it, but it definitely wasn't the leisurely touch-and-go upon each rooftop they adopted when he walked through the streets instead of blistering down alleyways. But this speed, this strength that was foreign to him, a well of strength he found intoxicating and just a little scary. He swallowed thickly, uncertain, and then he attempted to change the subject. He wasn't sure this development was welcome. The last thing he needed was to be ostracized any further. What was their problem anyways? It seemed like the wrong question, as the girl looked down and played with her fingers. I don't know, she admitted, although both had some sort of clue. Lower class, that's what the boy said, wasn't it? They were civilians, and she was what? He wasn't sure, nor did he really care. There was no distinction for him between nobles and common folk. After all, they all hated him equally. But this girl didn't, or wouldn't, at least until she learned. Or maybe she already knew, and didn't care? It was a tantalizing thought, and one he squashed the second it attempted to worm its way into his heart. They kept saying my eyes fresh tears fell, and his heart yearned to comfort her. Hey, he said, more insistently as his hand came to her shoulder. It's okay, those guys, they were stupid anyways. When she looked up at him again, he took a moment to study her. Besides, what's wrong with your eyes? They're a little weird. It didn't take a genius to see the way she seemed to shrink in on herself for a moment. But they're pretty too. His hand left her, and both came up to interlace his fingers behind his head. Sides, I got whiskers anyway. I think I topped the weird scale, too. He beamed at her, which alongside his comment, forced a furious heat to her face, despite the cold. Mustering up all of her courage, she leaned forward slightly as she spoke. Well, why your whisker marks are CCU too. The shock at the comment didn't fully have the time to write itself across his features before they were interrupted. Oh, Naruto's head turned slightly, surprised to find the older girl he'd seen pushing her little sister on the swings had approached. That was a very impressive display, the dark-haired older girl complimented, and Naruto couldn't find the words to correct her. It was impressive, but confusing, and she gave him a smile, one that was more eyes than her lips, and her hand extended his way. He took the offer for 2 quick shakes. Izumi Uchiha, she introduced, and he hesitated in turn. If he spoke his name, would she? Naruto, he said softly. Naruto Uzumaki. Her head inclined briefly, and her occupied hand brought her young sister around, a girl that seemed about their age that had comfortably taken up residence behind her elder sister, Sasuke. She mumbled, at the prodding of her older sister's gaze. Surprised he hadn't been turned away, it didn't take long for his naturally extroverted personality to shine through. Nice to meet ya, He smiled at her enthusiastically, but didn't bother extending his hand. She seemed a little shy, and so he doubted the gesture would be welcome. "Oh," he said suddenly, whipping his gaze back around to the pale-eyed girl. "What's your name?" This time, when she spoke, he did offer a hand, although she was slow to take it, and flushed to high heavens. "Hinata," she said, firmer now than she had been before. "Speaking of Hinata," Izumi spoke. "My sister and I are here because I believe we spied an older Hyuga seeking you. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" At the mention of her handler, Hinata found herself alert. "We got separated," she informed. Izumi took the information in stride. While normally it'd be a trivial task for a Hyuga to seek someone out, the use of their dojutsu was heavily discouraged in public spaces. Locating the lost clan's heir would probably constitute a reasonable reason to use it, but kids are kids, and they were visiting a park. If she could be found without the use of their eyes and the risk of reprimand, that would be the preferred route every time. "Well then, I believe we should reunite the two of you." Her free hand was extended to Hinata, who found herself reluctant to take it. "Wait, Naruto, are you here often?" Surprise shook his encroaching sadness away. Just seconds ago, he was absolutely certain this would be the last he'd see out of any of them. Perhaps not the biggest loss, but for a boy with no friends to his name. "Yeah," he said, a little more excitedly, or perhaps more desperately than he'd intended. "Basically all the time. If you come back soon, maybe we could meet, like here again?" It was Hinata's turn to beam as she took the eldest Uchiha's hand and prepared to leave. "Tomorrow?" she queried. "Tomorrow." Oddly enough, when they all departed, he didn't really feel alone anymore. "What do you mean I can't?" Then again, Naruto probably should have anticipated it wouldn't last. Hinata rounded on her guardian, a similarly pale-eyed man apparently named Ko. Hinata's outburst was the product of a rather predictable response when his newfound friend informed him that she'd be playing with Naruto. It was a clear, resounding no. Naruto shrunk into himself a bit while the two argued, refusing to meet the older man's eyes. If he had, he might have registered the man's surprise at the Hyuga heiress' repeated objections, but no ground was being granted for her backbone. In his effort to keep his eyes from meeting the stoic, unyielding gaze of the older Hyuga, he was the only one to notice the approach of a dark-haired duo. "Izumi, Sasuke," he said happily, surprised they'd shown. They certainly hadn't made it obvious they'd come along yesterday. "Good morning, Naruto-kun." He smiled when the eldest Uchiha greeted him, and the fact that the younger girl was walking just a little more confidently now beside her sister, instead of behind her. It faded slightly though, recalling the current predicament with Hinata. While Sasuke waved at him and he returned the gesture, Izumi found herself tuning into the Hyuga's conversation. "I apologize, Hinata-sama, but your father wouldn't." That's not true." Hinata returned with an insistent stomp of one of her little feet. "Father wouldn't mind be playing with anyone else, and you didn't before." Izumi figured that was about her cue to jump in. She detached herself from Sasuke as they passed Naruto, leaving the two to themselves as she approached. There was a brief flicker of satisfaction when Ko's eyes widened nearly imperceptibly. Although Izumi didn't quite have any ground to stand on, any rank to pull here, she was respected, and it tended to show. She offered Hinata her hand, which was taken shortly. "Good morning, Hinata-chan. I'm glad you came to play with my younger sister. Sometimes I'm afraid she doesn't interact with enough people her own age." The Uchiha prodigy cast a glance at Hinata's guardian. "You wouldn't mind if I take it from here, would you? Please go and relax for a while, I assure you they're in safe hands." The hesitation was nerve-wracking, but eventually Izumi received a nod in turn. "I won't be far," he began. "There's a cafe just across the street from the park. Please come find me if Hinata-sama needs anything." With a short bow, he turned and left, leaving Hinata to smile up at her. In fact, all of the children seemed quite happy. Even Sasuke, who was still a little distant for anyone that wasn't a part of her immediate family. Not that Izumi imagined Sasuke would mind playing alone with the little blonde boy. In fact, after that brawl yesterday. "Hey, how'd you fight that guy off yesterday?" she queried, an amusing sight mostly because the eldest Uchiha assumed it'd take just a little longer for her younger sister to open up. Sasuke stepped closer to Naruto, dark eyes studying first his face, and then his arm. Her hand came up to poke his bicep, frowning contemplatively. "I dunno how you hit him so hard you kinda have noodle arms." Well, let it not be said her little sister was any good at making friends. Izumi nearly facepalmed, until Naruto smiled brightly. "Really? You think so?" How he managed to be pleased that he had noodle arms was beyond Izumi. At least her little sister hadn't completely. "That's supposed to be an insult," Sasuke informed. Hey, what the hell?" This time, she did facepalm. After the three settled down and began to chat, which was primarily led by the boy's admission that he had no idea how he hit so hard, they looked for a game to play. How about ninja? It was Naruto's suggestion, and probably for good reason. It made sense for a child in a ninja village to potentially aspire to be a ninja. However, this was also a game he'd attempted to play with other kids in the past, only to be met with rejection time and time again. The eldest Uchiha had a better idea. "Why would you three play ninja?" she called, from the position she'd come to rest at, leaning against a tree. "I do believe our Hyuga friend here has had instruction in something much more appealing than just acting the part." It took a knowing glance Hinata's way for the little girl to realize what Izumi was intending. It was a well-known secret that in the Hyuga clan, chakra control methods are taught just as soon as the children can interpret the words to be instructed. There was little doubt in Izumi's mind that Hinata could ascend walls, or stumble atop her bathwater with ease. Chakra control is a very underrated skill, one she had every intention of teaching Sasuke, and one that Naruto would need to learn sooner rather than later. Why not kill two birds with one stone, and bond the three closer together for it? Ugh, this sucks. Staring up at the sky for probably the 5th time in the span of as many minutes, Naruto prepared himself for another attempt as climbing the nearest tree. Hinata's Byakugan was a massive help. Standing at the base of the tree, and lowering his output ever smaller until the pale-eyed princess told him he was using the right amount, worked beautifully. Except, of course, that when he tried to raise his foot to step onto the tree, the chakra focused to his feet pulled up clumps of soil and grass attached to his foot. After this incident, he took to running at the tree and attempting to mimic the amount she'd showed him before. Results were just a little mixed. He could make it a little ways up, but he found that he was impressively bad at maintaining the amount required, with constant fluctuations of increased output blasting him away from the tree. Sasuke was having plenty more success, nearly halfway up the tree, and many of her problems were fluctuations of lowered output, meaning, primarily, that her feet would mostly slip until she quickly righted the issue, instead of being thrown away from the bark. It was frustrating, for sure, but Naruto had fun nonetheless. None of them, not even Sasuke, noticed when Izumi vanished. By the time she returned, Naruto was sitting on the first, large branch he'd managed to reach, and Sasuke was sat next to him, having refused to climb higher for fear of heights, though she could walk up and down her self-imposed limit without much issue. Hinata, on the other hand, was underneath them, standing on the branch upside down because it was better practice, apparently. Zumi! Sasuke was second to notice her sister after Hinata, and Naruto only came around when he caught his breath and dared to glance up at the sound of the younger Uchiha's voice. Look, I got it perfect. Happy to demonstrate, the raven-haired child descended the trunk, waiting until she was on solid ground to barrel toward her sister and hug one of her legs. Good job, Izumi praised, beckoning the other two down with a gesture. The hand hidden behind her back came around to offer the sight of a few items blunted, stone, kunai, and shuriken. Am I gonna get to practice with them? Sasuke said happily, breaking away to cheer at her older sister's nod. You're going to show your friends too. You've become quite proficient in our lessons. I think you can take on 2 students of your own, don't you? When Naruto got closer, he inspected the odd ninja tools. They definitely weren't like any he'd seen before, especially given they were made of rock. Why are these kunai so weird? He questioned earnestly. Well, that's quite simple, actually. You 3 can't practice safely with sharper tools yet, nor could you practice very well if the weapons were always blunted. These are made with a special seal. Whenever they're near chakra, the residual energy is converted into earth-natured chakra by the seal, and it blunts the stone kunai. However, whenever it's not near anybody with chakra quicker than his eyes could process, Izumi whipped the kunai toward the tree they were just climbing, and the kunai sunk into the bark like the end hadn't been smooth just moments ago. It reverts back to a sharp point. They'll be perfect for little ninja in training such as the 3 of you. Awed by the sight, and only half comprehending the explanation offered, Naruto found himself silent as each of them were given a set of stone kunai and shuriken. I've set up some targets down there, Izumi said with a gesture. I'll leave their instruction to you for now, Amuto. Naruto and Izumi rested against the tree as they watched Hinata and Sasuke move. While it couldn't quite be called a spar by any stretch of the imagination, it almost did look that way, with the 2 of them going through their respective clans' katas together. Target practice had gone well, he felt. Naruto wasn't a prodigy with thrown weaponry like Sasuke, but after a few corrections his accuracy was passable enough for his first try. All said, it was a good day, but Naruto couldn't help but feel just a little melancholy as he watched his newfound friends. Hinata had taught them a really cool skill, never mind how generally important chakra control seemed to be. Sasuke taught them how to properly throw shuriken and kunai. Naruto had nothing to offer his friends. He had no kata he could go through with them, although Izumi had promised she'd offer him something soon. He also just wasn't sure what kind of ninja he wanted to be. Hinata was a short-range powerhouse, or would be anyways. Sasuke was certain to be a long-range monster, with that weird illusionary jutsu stuff Izumi told them about that Uchiha seemed to be so good at, her shuriken jutsu, and the long-range fire techniques of her clan. Once again, it just begged the question, what did he have to offer them? Ryo, for your thoughts? Naruto frowned when Izumi cut through his thoughts. With a quiet sigh, he realized it wasn't of any use to lie. That old man told him that he was an open book, a boy who wore his heart on his sleeves, an awful habit for ninja, a good habit for a man. It's just he scratched at his cheek idly, his cheeks hot. It was annoying, having to admit his weaknesses, but how else could he fix them, if he didn't take advice from someone strong enough to better him? If he couldn't teach them anything, he'd learn, and learn, and learn so that he wouldn't hold them back, if nothing else. I just wish I could help them, too, he admitted finally. It seemed to plunge the 2 into a comfortable silence for some time, until Izumi hummed a query his way. Who says you can't? She questioned finally. The other day you seemed shockingly fast and strong. You certainly didn't seem weak. Izumi's lips pulled into a small smile. And maybe you have other skills you could teach them. Things that are useful for ninja, but not as flashy as being defiant of gravity, or hitting a bullseye every time. Can you hunt? Fish? Can you track down animals, or even enemy ninja? I've also happened to notice a boy with such bright eyes and blonde hair be rather stealthy, when he wants to be. Izumi smiled, reaching over to lace her fingers through spiky, blonde locks of hair. His eyes had widened with every word, and why shouldn't they? Having the occasional stint as one of his ANBU guards, Izumi knew exactly where Naruto's skills shone best, and she hardly had the time to muss his hair before she was thanked profusely, and he was running off after a clumsy bow. It warmed her heart in a way nothing had since her visits to old battlefields from the Third Ninja War. She drew her knees up to her chest to watch them. No more need be done for now, except for nurture their progression as young ninja. The rest was taken care of. The forging of an unbreakable bond between Uchiha, Hyuga, and Uzumaki. Winded, dazed, and staring at the sky, it was sometimes difficult to recall why Naruto was so eager to spar with Izumi Uchiha. Well done, the older girl praised, a dark curtain of hair framing her features as she smiled and offered a hand to help him up. You're getting better. He smiled a little ruefully at that. If he looked at the situation pragmatically, he supposed he was lasting longer and longer in their bouts, although it remained very clear that the Uchiha wasn't fighting anywhere near her fullest. The more frustrated side of him knew that their spars were little more than a mad dash to survive. Without abandoning the kata Izumi was showing him in an effort to scramble away from the next punch sent the 5-year-old's way. Now, Izumi said, once Naruto was no longer fighting for air on his back. I want you to tell me the weaknesses of this style in particular. It took him a while before he could even formulate a response. Well, the academy style is mostly for most part meant to be okay at a lot of different stuff. The eldest Uchiha nodded at that. Still, in an effort to take advantage of Naruto's natural speed, Izumi was trying to optimize the all-arounder in hopes of taking advantage of his natural speed advantage over his peers. Izumi had no such disadvantage. It's too broad, he ventured, soft and uncertain, afraid to disappoint. Izumi mulled over the response for a few moments. You're not far off, she granted. The style you're learning does become less effective or even devolves into straight evasion the better at taijutsu your opponent is relative to you. You have very few options to create opportunities to strike decisively unless you can take advantage of a slower opponent, and, she chuckled a bit awkwardly. You're 5. These issues are made worse by the fact that you need to get close to me to even attempt to strike, and unless I want you there, you won't be getting close to me, Naruto grunted, a little disgruntled. Izumi made it somewhat clear early on that if Naruto didn't dedicate himself to the art, he'd never be the taijutsu powerhouse that Hinata would become, or that even Sasuke had the potential for once she unlocked her Sharingan and began to practice with it. That was mostly okay with him. He couldn't really see himself as a taijutsu specialist. Over the past few months practicing with his friends, he's had at least a brief foray into most branches of the ninja arts. He was so bad at genjutsu that Izumi seemed a little offended. His taijutsu was passable. No, it was good for a 5-year-old boy, however little he felt that meant, personally, but he couldn't claim he was as good as the Hyuga Juken or the Uchiha Interceptor Fist. Ninjutsu was, by far, where he shone the most. Izumi told the trio that Naruto's reserves were beyond either of them combined, and then some. When Izumi showed them a basic water-nature transformation technique purifying still water until it was potable, Naruto could do it again and again and again and again, long past when either of his friends would drop. It made him feel good, guiltily, but his intentions remained true. If he was going to excel, it would be for them. Except not much of their training revolved around ninjutsu. Mostly, they were really only focused on the so-called Academy 3, Henge, Kawarimi, and the basic illusionary clone jutsu. Of the three, Naruto was a natural with the Henge. His Kawarimi was good, and could even be done with a single seal now, but his was apparently still worse than either Hinata's or Sasuke's. In Izumi's words, the amount of chakra he poured into the jutsu made his body swap technique about as subtle as one of her great fireballs, which was really saying something. It was the clone jutsu he had the most trouble with. No matter how hard he tried to squeeze his damn chakra like it was being forced through the head of a pin, he was always using too much for the illusion to come out as anything more than sickly. It wasn't that bad though. As an emergency measure to fix his clone deficiency, they were taught a different clone technique that was a little more useful. Shadow clones were Naruto's bread and butter. As explained by Izumi, the shadow clones are an exceptionally powerful reconnaissance jutsu, naturally linked to their owner and capable of transmitting both chakra and knowledge gained. They were also a chakra sink, taxing enough that a higher level of the jutsu, the mass shadow clone jutsu, was labeled forbidden. It wasn't all bad, really. Even after expending chakra for the clones, a vast majority of the chakra pumped into each clone would be returned via the same link that transmitted the clone's memories. Not that it mattered for Naruto. He could create dozens of them without being winded, while Sasuke and Hinata would each call it quits after replicated themselves about 10 times. Izumi had, of course, limited him to having a mere 2 shadow clones active whenever they were included in his taijutsu spars. The way she described it, having too many would hamper him just as soon as helping him fight, liable of getting in the way of one another. With two teammates in Sasuke and Hinata, learning to fight capably with two shadow clones seemed like the best way to start, and the number could always be upped as he gained proficiency using the numbers to his advantage, rather than risking detriment. His thoughts were broken when Izumi giggled. "I think your friends are looking for their guinea pig." He made a face at her insinuation, even though it was a little bit accurate. His capability with the shadow clone jutsu meant that he could assist his friends quite handily. In Sasuke's case, he was the perfect test subject for her genjutsu. The density of his chakra made it a little more difficult for her to weave her illusions, which was apparently good practice. It was doubly helpful in that Naruto learned to sense foreign chakra invading his senses a little more easily, a double-edged sword. In that Sasuke also got more skillful in hiding it. In Hinata's case, his naturally oversized tenketsu were an excellent stepping stone for her to refine her visual prowess. Improving one's Byakugan meant both extending its range and its perception. Hinata couldn't, for instance, see Sasuke's tenketsu. She was just barely capable of spotting Naruto's, and so sitting with a clone while she meditated and strained her eyes was a massive boon. That, and sparring with his clones, to practice hitting the correct spots with razor-like, invisible lances of chakra that would pop his clone just as soon as cut off their chakra flow. Her next test subject, Reed Victim, would be perfectly capable of pointing out where her chakra struck, which was good enough to determine whether or not she did it correctly. It was all fine with him, though. For the most part, he could have one clone go through his kata forwards, backwards, as fast or as slow as possible to commit the movements to his muscle memory. Another would be dedicated to his shuriken jutsu, while his main body either exercised, read, because history had to be a part of the academy's curriculum, or meditated. Yes, meditation. It wasn't an easy ask, but it was a necessary one. Izumi had been the first to notice that his strength and speed improved remarkably whenever he was at his calmest. Just after his early morning stretches, he was at top form, but there was one issue. Naruto wasn't exactly known to be the most patient person in the world, and so his peace quickly evaporated by the time he was first laid flat on his back. Izumi theorized that meditation would help him immensely, because this boost to his skill was significant enough to be confounding, and he was inclined to agree, recalling the day he first met Hinata. Unfortunately, calm couldn't be forced, and so near torturous size a position stillness was now a major part of his curriculum, but that was also typical Uzumaki exaggeration. Honestly, it was surprisingly pleasant. Sitting there, feeling the world move and act around and despite him. Sometimes, although he could hear them, it felt like he could even tell where they were through the world around them. Every crunched blade of grass, every sweep and flutter of wind that followed their strikes. Also, there was definitely something to be said for the first time Izumi struck him after one of these sessions, and recoiled from the punch when his skin was like stone. No, Naruto thought, as he ran off to join up with Hinata and Sasuke. Meditation is definitely not all bad. Hey brat. Naruto couldn't help but be just a little startled when the massive, white-haired man stepped from his apartment's kitchen and into the entryway where Naruto was in the process of removing his shoes. Breathing deep to still his racing heart before a heart attack could take root, he fixed the older man with a glare. "I don't remember giving you a key, old man," which received a chuckle in turn. "I don't require needing one, not when your windows are never locked." They both shared a small laugh then, but the humor was nothing but a distraction. Naruto's hand came to rest on his stomach. "Is it time to check that again?" Jiraiya looked a little uncomfortable, before moving aside so that Naruto could follow him into the kitchen. The Sanin's visits were relatively infrequent, happening every other week since his 5th birthday, just 2 months ago. Now that December had crept up on them, he did like the older man, but these visits were scary, and hard to get through. This revelation, that a massive fox was sealed in his belly, the reason his presence was so unwelcome. The idea that the fox could influence him somehow, or break free, or, I'm afraid so. Go ahead and get rid of the jacket and shirt. Removing his upper clothes, Naruto took Jiraiya's offered hand, allowing himself to be hauled up into a seated position on the table. In the already cramped apartment space, it was almost comical how large the man looked when he took a seat between Naruto's dangling legs, a press of his finger just below Naruto's navel revealing the intricate seal in full. Even after all of these years, Minato, your work is still truly astounding. Although the Reaper Death Seal was not Minato's original creation, the modifications done on the fly were all his. Minato was always as quick mentally as he was on his feet, and a split-second decision that night after the harrowing realization that he need to seal the beast into his son, led to their predicament now. Minato saw it fit for his son to be the first to access the chakra of the nine-tailed beast, but he'd made a miscalculation. Truthfully, nobody understood fully the implications of the Shinigami attempting to take the tailed beast. While Jiraiya didn't have complete insight into his students' thoughts that night, the intent seemed clear enough. Tailed beasts are masses of pure natural energy, given body through yang chakra, and given mind through yin chakra. It seemed to be Minato's intent that night to seal away the beast seen half within the Shinigami's stomach with him. It seemed on its surface like the perfect solution. Naruto would then be capable of accessing the beast's chakra without the chakra having a mind, and Minato's eternal battle within the death god's stomach would be made easier if the beast had no physical form. It seemed, briefly, that it worked to some degree. The probing of Inoichi Yamanaka into the baby's psyche revealed that Minato's assumptions had been false. Confusingly, Although their best sensors confirmed that there was no well of Yin chakra within the seal, the beast still seemed to be conscious, and the Yamanaka was rejected, violently. Lastly, it seemed that either the Shinigami was incapable of holding the tailed beast's Yin chakra, or that it had simply regenerated. It was only 5 years after the beast's sealing that they realized the Kyuubi had regenerated its Yin chakra in full, meaning the boy now housed the nine tails in its entirety. It was a fearful realization, because none of them understood fully the implications, and most importantly, whether or not the modified Reaper Death Seal was even capable of holding the nine-tailed beast's full might. So it made sense that twice a month, Jiraiya was recruited to check up on the strength of the seal. His original intent was to introduce himself to the boy when he became a genin, but now, he thought as he brushed Naruto's stomach to elicit a sharp jerk and giggle, "I can't say I mind having met him early. You did that on purpose, old man," Naruto accused after his laughter died out, none too happy about the smirk on the old shinobi's face. "The good news is that your seal seems as strong as ever. But that doesn't necessarily mean the fox has no potential to influence his host. You told me last time that you've made some new friends. How has that been?" While his interest in the child's life was genuine, he'd also been told by Sarutobi that this little group of friends had begun training in the ninja arts. It was heartening for sure, but some insight into the boy's development might help him work out whether or not the tail beast was influencing him. He listened intently as Naruto blabbered on about his friends, Hinata, Sasuke, and the latter's older sister, Izumi. It brought a grin to the old man's features. "You sly dog, Naruto. I know you'll do me proud already." His grin faded some as Naruto recounted his efforts training, his successes, and his failures. It's no wonder that the boy loses in their taijutsu bouts. The academy's kata isn't meant for serious field work, and it doesn't help that he's up against the Uchiha's interceptor fist, let alone the renowned Hyuga. He was doomed from the start. Still though, if his stories are true in regards to his ninjutsu and shuriken jutsu, he sounds like a true genius. All three of them do, really. Like father, like son. And Izumi said I got really weird chakra, but I'd been doing just fine. Jerked from his thoughts, Jiraiya's heart leapt into his throat at this particular revelation. Trying not to betray his concern, an eyebrow climbed until Naruto noticed it. "This weird chakra, what does Izumi mean by that? Has she told you?" Although his line of questioning was about as subtle as a brick wall, Naruto was also 5. "Oh. Well, there's a few things, I guess. She has me meditate a lot cause she says I get a lot stronger and faster when I'm calm and stuff, and one time she hit me and hurt herself," he said proudly, before he brought a little finger up to tap his chin thoughtfully. "That's not really the weird part though. She says whenever I do that stuff, my ninjutsu doesn't drain any chakra and they're a lot stronger." Naruto shrugged noncommittally. While he, too, was curious about the nature of this mystery, he was also an eager child that wasn't going to investigate too much if he was being made stronger for the oddity. But Jiraiya was completely shocked. "If I didn't know any better, I'd say that sounds like..." He appraised Naruto again. Yes, natural chakra sounded like the most likely culprit given the information he had now. It would explain the Uchiha's confusion. Between the renowned Sharingan and Byakugan, either could sense natural energy. Even with Izumi's visual prowess, to her it seemed like Naruto wasn't expending chakra at all. If he was using natural energy in place of his own, it'd also be the explanation for his increased strength and speed, and the strength of his skin. But it didn't make sense. The only person he's ever heard of utilizing sage mode without a summon was Hashirama Senju. Even then, Hashirama was an imperfect sage as evidenced by the markings that would take residence on his skin whilst calling upon natural chakra. If Naruto's story was to be believed at face value, not only would he be a natural at the regulation of natural energy, but he'd also be a perfect sage, assuming the lack of cluing Jiraiya in on any strange features was indication enough. It simply seemed impossible, but perhaps an explanation was in front of him. Konoha truly had very little understanding of the effects being the nine-tailed beast's host had. Both Mito and Kushina Uzumaki utilized seals that didn't allow them to tap into the beast's chakra. Naruto was well and truly the first, as evidenced by his whisker-like birthmarks. Jiraiya heard rumors about other tailed beasts having similar effects on their hosts. In Taki, stories of the seven tails container having wings had reached him. Iwa's tailed beasts were also relevant. Here, could the nine tails offer some form of natural energy absorption? It wasn't clear, but it was the best explanation he had so far. It almost didn't matter though, not as much as confirming his suspicions. In truth, there were very few sensors capable of sensing natural energy, and the old saying "it takes one to know one" was extremely relevant here. It takes a sage to sense sage chakra. "Come here," he directed, standing and helping Naruto down from the table, before guiding the two to the center of the room to take a seat cross-legged. "Why don't you demonstrate your meditation for me?" he suggested, shutting his eyes to do the same. As it turned out, the blonde-haired boy didn't even need to begin for Jiraiya to sense it in droves. His next breath was taken sharply, his mind's eye watching the ambient nature chakra cling to the boy, absorbed and expelled at a constant rate. "Naruto," he said, his voice suddenly very serious, "get up, walk around a bit." He didn't elaborate further. He felt Naruto hesitate, stand, and then move. It was unbelievable. This continuous absorption of natural energy didn't end, even in motion. It was a feat no sage ever had mastered. Not Minato, who had perfected the art, although his usage was sparse, given his low chakra reserves, was capable of this. Not Ma, nor Pa, who had spent lifetimes beyond Jiraiya's utilizing natural energy, were capable of doing such a thing while moving. Suggesting he was shocked would be egregious. It took moments to recollect how to breathe, and moments beyond that to realize Naruto was chortling happily. What happened to your nose? He giggled, trying in vain to stop his amusement at the older man's expense. It's all lumpy. Ceasing his unintentional, continued gathering of natural chakra, his fingers twitched of their own accord. It took everything, literally everything the old sage had not to reverse summon both of them to Mayaboku this very instant. He managed to settle himself though, ignoring the boy's growing worry as he paced. I need to talk to Sarutobi, now. But he glanced at the blonde, shaking himself from his stupor when the boy's concern finally became evident. Sorry, Naruto, but this is very impressive. I think I'd have some friends who would be interested in learning a little more about this weird chakra of yours. They might even be willing to show you a new taijutsu style, Frog Q might. His concern now, first and foremost, was getting Naruto on board with this. It was difficult though, because even now, as the boy's eyes shone with his interest, but it'd take a while. Maybe a month, or even longer. He grimaced when Naruto's face fell. It was to be expected, really. Naruto finally had friends his own age, beyond ramen stand workers and the village's elderly kage. Asking him to depart from them was always going to be a bitter pill for the child to swallow. Still, Naruto seemed to debate with himself for a few moments. I can't yet, he said finally, resolutely. Hinata-chan's birthday is coming up, and I promised I'd be there. That, at least, managed a smile out of Jiraiya. Oh? And have you managed to figure out a present for this girlfriend of yours? Naruto's innocence was a major point of the Toad Sage's amusement. It was sad that he was inexperienced enough in dealing with other people, but still, Kami above. It was just too cute that the boy had no understanding of the difference between girlfriend and girlfriend. Naruto frowned at that and shook his head. No, I don't really know what would be a good present, he admitted finally. Oh? Well, count your lucky stars. From the east to the west, in charming women, Jiraiya does it best. The irresistible, gallant, great Toad Sage of Mount Mayaboku, his little charge wasn't impressed in the slightest, and he couldn't even dance around properly in the cramped apartment. Ceasing his theatrics and grumbling, he rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Well, what does she like, kid? Any hobbies? Oh. She really likes sensei, and cinnamon buns, too. She likes collecting herbs and stuff, and she said she presses flowers with her mom. Jiraiya couldn't help but grin at that. Well then, we have a plan, don't we? I'll go and talk to Sarutobi-sensei before I pick up your groceries, and tonight we'll practice making zensai until you get it down perfect. Just before her birthday, I'll introduce you to the friends of mine I was telling you about, and we can arrange for a date for you to begin training with them, if they accept you. They happen to have plenty of rare flowers you won't find anywhere in the elemental nations, so it'll be perfect for your little girl friend's flower pressing. While Naruto celebrated, Jiraiya patted his wallet with the slightest frown. He'd probably need to get the ingredients for zensai a dozen times over for them to produce anything worthwhile, let alone to get Naruto prepared to fix the dish to bring along to the party. He was very capable of throwing together a mean stew over a fire, with sealed spices and wild game. This would be a completely different ballpark. Oh well. Cleanup later would be handled well enough with a shadow clone, while he put the tuckered boy down to rest. The cost of tonight's practice would be covered a few thousand times over with the newest edition of Ika Ika. In fact, he had a stroke of inspiration. The journey of a strapping young lad to faraway lands, to procure a one-of-a-kind gift for his love. He was sure that one would fly off the shelves, especially with his special brand of deviant charm. For now, though, he needed to talk to the elderly fire shadow. Jiraiya sighed quietly as the room filled with smoke. It would be amusing almost any other time, but even now he remained completely shocked. Even the Sarutobi's habit of billowing smoke like a chimney whenever he was concerned didn't alleviate the simple fact that neither man knew what to make of this development. The nine-tailed fox, Sarutobi finally spoke. Perhaps this collection of natural energy is simply the fox regathering its own chakra? It didn't take a genius to gather the hopeful tone, and even then, the implication was obvious. The aging Kage was banking on this being a temporary development, but Jiraiya's head slowly shook. I'd considered it, he admitted, but the fox's chakra hasn't grown since I began watching him. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but it's doubtful. Unless any further developments happen, we have to assume that the fox in its entirety now resides within Naruto. I doubt this ability has anything to do with that. Rubbing at his forehead idly, the Sandaime Hokage sighed. It's worrying that this has seemed to occur so suddenly, but I can't deny that under normal circumstances, such a powerful ability would be beneficial. Hiruzen Sarutobi was a man known for his mastery over the ninja arts. It didn't matter the area, he was an expert in every branch, from every nature transformation, down to techniques as simple as forging his body into a weapon via taijutsu, he knew it all. There were very few exceptions to this rule, most notably were Kekkei Genkai and Senjutsu. Even so, he knew more than most how indescribably powerful the utilization of natural energy could make someone. This was doubly so, for a ninja with chakra reserves bolstered by the greatest of the nine-tailed beasts. The technique's only real drawback was the setup, its impracticality in battle unless one had time beforehand to ready themselves. So for a loyal ninja of Konoha to wield such a power unrestricted by its only, if glaring, limitation. But that was just the issue, wasn't it? His heart felt heavy, and it felt like a betrayal to even so much as question Naruto's unyielding loyalty to his village. But at the same time, Hiruzen had to be completely honest with himself. Naruto's loyalty was completely blind, and utterly undeserved. Almost anyone would crack after having their existence, their opportunity at acknowledgement denied for so long. Naruto didn't love this village for the same reasons most did. He didn't understand the bond that Konoha shinobi formed with one another, unlike any other village. Or perhaps, Hiruzen mused with a slight flush of hope, that won't be the case anymore. He wasn't blind to the young boy's development with Sasuke and Hinata. It was heartening to see him finally forging bonds, with people his own age no less. Even so, wasn't the limited scope of his love for the village meant to be frightening? Shinobi's lives burn particularly brightly. Strong, but short in their very nature. If either one, or both of them were to fall in battle, Naruto's blind loyalty may crumble after having his eyes opened. Harnessing the nine-tailed fox's power, and a capability for senjutsu not seen even in the Shodaime Hokage, the idea of Naruto turning his back on Konoha was spine-chilling. He couldn't help it, when his mind turned toward Orochimaru. It would remain tempting in the very worst way to stunt Naruto's development until he could be certain that this wouldn't come back to bite him like his serpent of a formerly prized student. But Hiruzen was also too soft for that. His hat felt so heavy now, and he never felt the entirety of his years like he was in this very moment. Taking him to Mayaboku would probably be for the best, Hiruzen finally murmured. It won't be long now, he'll be enrolled in the academy when classes begin anew late next year. He attempted a wry smile. The boy's ninja career was never meant to be a normal one. Perhaps it's only for the best that he gets used to it early. What exactly do you mean by that, sensei? Hiruzen couldn't help but smile a bit more at his student's protectiveness. Jiraiya was a man who had seen too much, lost one too many students. Learning that the Nine-Tails had somehow regained its Yin chakra was frightening in the worst way, but it was also ultimately beneficial, in that it forced Jiraiya to give the boy a try long before he could have mustered the confidence to introduce himself otherwise. It's a consideration that I hope will be irrelevant when Naruto finally graduates, Hiruzen finally admitted. But it seems inevitable that when his career as a genin begins, word of our Jinchuriki harboring an uncanny resemblance to Konoha's yellow flash will circulate throughout the other villages. If this does happen, he stood, moving to face the window that overlooked his beloved village, we can rest assured that IWA, at the very least, will want his head. It's for that reason that I have no intent on allowing him, or his team unfortunately, by extension, to participate in the Chunin exams. But sensei, holding up a hand to quell his student's growing shock, and undoubtedly ire, Hiruzen continued. He'll have to be promoted unconventionally, to be certain. Frankly, we can't afford to ship him off to another village for the exams, and even if he waited until we were hosting them, it'd undoubtedly be a blank check for IWA to send a team with the primary goal of eliminating him. Even if he can defend himself. Hinata. Sasuke. You have no idea how much your lives may mean to Naruto's future, to the safety of this village. His hands came together behind his back. At the very least, it still wouldn't be worth worsening tensions with IWA unnecessarily, or risking the lives of his teammates. There is, of course, something to be said for displaying the prowess of our young shinobi, but it's increasingly becoming unnecessary. We have a near monopoly of missions from Hai no Kuni, and even the daimyo of Kaze no Kuni has begun offering select, high-ranked missions to Konoha. Right now, we're nearly more prosperous than ever before, if not for the countless lives lost in the nine-tailed fox's attack. And so nothing would be gained but pointless posturing if we entered him into the exams. There were a few moments of silence before either man cut through the heavy, pregnant pause. Let's not be so hasty, sensei. Jiraiya finally spoke. We have a little over 6 years before we have to consider how Naruto's career will progress. Plenty can change by then, although it's near useless to bank of Inoki changing his ways. If nothing else, the Chunin exams are a rite of passage. No henge would work, or last under attack, but it's possible that the experience is important enough to go old school, hair dye and makeup if necessary, to allow him to participate. Perhaps you're right. He hoped he could be excused, for not sounding entirely convinced. I do have a nasty habit for thinking too far ahead. Most pertinent right now is his trip to visit Mayaboku. Do you know when you two will be gone for this month or so long departure? Jiraiya chuckled then. Not until sometime after December 27th. One of his friends has her birthday then. Oh? Do tell me more. It was enough to bring a smile to the aged man's face. I do have a penchant for wearing myself down with worst-case scenarios. Naruto, cherish those precious to you while you have them. I have no doubt then, that you'll become truly strong with those bonds, or that through them, you too will find the will of fire. Naruto sighed softly as he walked down the street, his arms folded behind his head. In his estimation, it was definitely way too early for him to be doing anything but sleep, but today was important. It was going to be the start of their second year at the academy. He was en route to Sasuke's house now. With the Uchiha compound being in the center of the village, it was their typical arrangement. Hinata and Naruto would get up a bit earlier and meet up at Sasuke's for breakfast, which Mikoto-sama was all too happy to provide for them, before they all walked to school. He was a little younger than most of their peers, and Hinata even further so. When they'd started last year, with his birthday being just 2 months after the academy start date, and Hinata's being 4 months after, they were allowed to enroll early so they weren't behind everyone else. The 6, soon-to-be 7-year-old ultimately found school to be a little boring. It wasn't that he learned nothing, exactly. He learned a lot of stuff that was mostly theoretical and history-based, but like his 2 friends, the academy had nothing in the way of shinobi skills to teach them yet. Maybe that would change as they got older, but right now the curriculum was somewhat laughable. The 3 of them were easily the best in any of the more physical aspects of their chosen line of work, and he wasn't the boasting type. It was just a little disappointing. Still, he guessed it was interesting occasionally. He enjoyed observing his classmates. It was a bit fascinating, really, like in taijutsu spars. When he was taught the frog kumite, the toads had described it to him as a perfect taijutsu style, devoid of flaws in offense or defense. While he thought the old toads were a little full of their style, he had to admit that even without utilizing it to its fullest, that is to say, with senjutsu chakra bolstering it, he'd caught up in leaps and bounds to both Sasuke and Hinata's hand-to-hand prowess. He was also hands down the best on the male side of their sparring, but there was a lot to learn from his classmates. Kiba, for instance, was very capable in the fast, feral style of his clan. Shino's style consisted mostly of grappling, which was kind of amusing in its own way because Choji's was similar, when the boy would fight, although Shino's was mostly used to impart as many of his chakra-devouring bugs as possible. And even then, hand-to-hand combat was apparently a last resort for his clan, which probably explained why the otherwise logical, intelligent boy fell relatively middle of the pack there. Shikamaru had pretty much no taijutsu style that Naruto could discern, which was probably mostly because he really didn't even try, even when he wasn't allowed to outright forfeit as per usual. Most fascinating to Naruto, though, was the difference between the clan children and the civilians. Will Sakura Haruno and Ino Yamanaka please come forward? Naruto immediately found himself at rapt attention. He's seen Ino spar, of course, but this early in the year he's only had the opportunity to see her placed against Sasuke and Hinata. Frankly, being thoroughly trounced by her competition didn't really give Naruto the opportunity he wanted to observe the Yamanaka clan's taijutsu style, if indeed they did have any. The academy had already covered the various clans and their contributions to Konoha. For instance, how the Aburame cooperated with Konoha's agricultural departments, and their abilities with insects to both keep crops safe and help them grow with bugs beneficial to the ecosystem. There was the Akimichi's culinary prowess, the Hyuda's diplomatic ability, the Nara's incredible intellect. Everyone looked confusedly Shikamaru's way here, who was blissfully unaware in his sleep, or the Uchiha, comprising the police force. Of course, none of this included the clan's contributions as shinobi. It was obvious enough for some, like the Uchiha and Hyuga, or the heavy hitters that were the Akimichi, or the tactical abilities of the Nara and Aburame. They'd been told, of course, about the Yamanaka, their prowess as censors, and Konoha's intelligence department for their mental techniques. Ultimately, it seemed to Naruto that Yamanaka actually being in the field was somewhat a misuse of their abilities, so he was excited now to see what they could do. He came away from the experience disappointed. It didn't seem like Ino had really any style about her, other than slugging her opponent and avoiding blows where she was able. But also, she was a clan child, and she had advantages in her early training, yes, apparently even physically to some degree, that Sakura didn't. Even as awkward and unrefined as it was, Ino was the very clear victor. It had him somewhat interested in the shy Sakura though, who despite her beating, didn't have any hard feelings toward her blonde friend. He's seen Sakura before, but not really playing with the other kids. She was bullied frequently, as far as he was aware, and it led to her being an outcast sort of like him. It drew him toward the girl immediately. He was similar to her in a few ways, primarily in being ostracized from most of their peers, in that they didn't really get the early benefits of clan training, although Naruto had to admit that maybe that wasn't true on his part anymore. Training with an Uchiha and Hyuga probably technically meant he was getting the benefits of clan training, after all. Not to mention the aid of the old lecher. But that didn't mean Sakura couldn't be great too, did it? He refused to believe that. The village's most famous hero, the Yondaime, the man that sealed the great fox within his stomach, he was a clanless orphan. He could sense great things in the girl's future, truly, and he figured that soon enough the teasing about her forehead would stop. It wasn't that bad, the girl was pretty even. Especially her hair, although it could stand to be darker, maybe? He couldn't explain that feeling. Maybe if he resolved to speak with her. Ow! He was pulled from his stupor by the annoyed, onyx glare of Sasuke Uchiha, the one that just pinched his cheek so harshly. I was talking to you, she said, her annoyance evident enough. What do you think you're staring at anyways? He rubbed his cheek, returning the glare pointedly. Nothing, just thinking. He defended, although he wasn't sure why he was defending anything. Jiraiya-sensei told him a few things about having girlfriends, and one of them was apparently that you're not supposed to annoy them, and that if you accidentally do, buttering them up was probably the best option. Plus, he really was a little apologetic that he'd zoned out. Sorry, Suki-chan. What were you saying? Just that this is boring. She summarized finally, a sentiment which even Hinata hummed agreement at. I could be practicing the Phoenix Flower Jutsu with Izumi right now. As annoyed as she sounded, it was amusing to Naruto that it came out like petulant whining. We're almost done for the day, anyways. Naruto offered, although he had to agree. Then again, he figured he'd be bored no matter how interesting the spar was, if he wasn't somehow improving himself all the while. As he neared the Uchiha compound, he considered the progression of his friends. Hinata had made leaps and bounds in the progression of her clan's techniques. According to Hinata, the Hyuga actually had a second sort of Kekkai Genkai, although it was more aptly described as a unique genetic quirk passed through the family, where most shinobi only master expelling chakra through the tenketsu located in their extremities. The Hyuga were known for their ability to do so easily and indiscriminately throughout every tenketsu in their body. It was all a long-winded way really, of explaining how she did that weird, if cool spinning move. Suffice to say, Hinata was learning many of the main family's techniques. As for Sasuke, her progress was no less impressive. It was some time over the past year or so that Sasuke had unlocked her Sharingan. Oddly, nobody really knew how that happened, not even Sasuke herself. As they understood, it lay dormant within her for some time, until Izumi noticed by chance with her own dojutsu activated that the flow of chakra into her younger sister's eyes had been heightened. Both he and Hinata were initially worried for their friend, when Izumi told them the Sharingan was typically unlocked via traumatic experience, with Sasuke insisting nothing of the sort had happened, though, and remaining uncertain of when precisely the unlocking of her eyes occurred. They all found themselves at a dead end. Why didn't you tell us? Naruto found himself a little sheepish at the sight of the dark-haired girl standing at his doorstep, her cheeks all puffed up and flushed with more than a little anger. It was 2 months since they'd started the academy, and less than a week since his birthday had come and gone. He didn't celebrate it. It was never a particularly joyous occasion for him, especially not now that he was aware of the burden he shouldered. October 10th, the day of the Kyuubi festival. It wasn't that he wasn't allowed to participate in the festivities, but the day was clearly somber, and even those that typically ignored him that day looked at him with eyes that make his chest hurt and his knees quiver. On that day, it was usually best that he simply kept to himself. I thought you guys would be busy with your families. It was a reasonable enough excuse, he figured, but Sasuke didn't seem to accept it in the slightest. I don't care, she huffed, which seemed to expel most of the air in her cheeks and stopped her from the chipmunk imitation she was doing moments ago. Naruto figured it'd be best he held his laughter. You've celebrated our birthdays, and you've gotten us gifts and stuff. I didn't want to hear this from Izumi. Her hand came up, a finger jabbing him sharply in the chest, pushing him backwards while the Uchiha girl stepped inside. Izumi's going to get Hinata now, she informed with a glare. And we're gonna make something right now to eat, and we're gonna celebrate your birthday. Late, she exhaled softly, and then her features softened. And we're gonna get you a gift whenever we can find something. That was her only regret in coming here now. But she couldn't bring herself to grab some stupid, random gift that didn't mean anything. If he wasn't going to tell her, and if she had to find out via her older sister, he could wait for her to pick out the perfect gift. And you're gonna enjoy yourself, understand me? Naruto couldn't really describe the way he was feeling now. Maybe it was the slight fear, either at Sasuke's reaction, or the inevitable ire of the Hyuga heiress when she arrived. More so than that now, though, was the way his chest swelled with something he couldn't describe. It was truly impossible to capture in any series of words that flew through his head. It was best described as the feelings bubbling within him. Happiness. Warmth. Closeness, or something stronger. Sadness, a feeling that made him want to sob and laugh all at the same time. Instead, he opted to step closer and squeeze the Uchiha heiress into a hug, eliciting a surprised squeak from the formerly annoyed girl. She eventually relaxed, after the surprise waned, and she couldn't help her smile when she returned it. Her eyes itched, too, or maybe something more intense than that, like they'd suddenly become too large for her sockets at the intensity of the vision before her. Naruto's sparsely furnished apartment was visually overwhelming in a way she couldn't describe. All she didn't know, though, was that his sniffling, smiling visage would be burned into her memory forever. He'd probably improved the most, though it was a little misleading in some ways. While he definitely improved at a rate much faster than either of his friends, they were much farther ahead of him to begin with. So, saying that he'd improved the most was really only saying he was catching up. But it was satisfying, nonetheless. Jiraiya-sensei told him that while his mastery of senjutsu was unrivaled, it was still hampered by his relatively low, for most senjutsu users, that is, chakra reserved. As it stood right now, his absorption of natural energy was still too low to cover for his greater emotional outbursts. If he got upset, or angry, his unconscious absorption of natural energy would be disrupted. Jiraiya estimated that as he aged, it'd eventually get to a point where relative to his chakra reserves, he'd store so much natural energy that even these outbursts wouldn't disrupt his sage mode. The frog Kumite was also massively helpful, to the point where he could beat Sasuke. Until that blasted Sharingan came out, he could keep up with Izumi, although she was still going easier on them, and he could mostly keep up with Hinata. Mostly. The Hyuga's Juken was way too scary, His ninjutsu had also improved leaps and bounds. Jiraiya had started offering him the occasional scroll and tips to learn during his visits to check on the seal, and it was discovered that he had very intense affinities for both earth and water, although the latter was a little higher still. Right now, though, the jutsu he learned were still mostly supplementary. For instance, the earth-natured mole mimicry, which allowed him to travel beneath the earth, or simple water-shape manipulation, for instance, to fill a container, best used in conjunction with the jutsu to make it potable. It felt good to progress, although it was a little annoying that these developments weren't happening at the academy, where they should indeed be happening. But Sasuke said she had some sort of plan for the academy this year. He wasn't exactly sure what she intended yet, but they were going to discuss it today before the school year was properly underway. Speak of the devil, he ran the rest of the way down the street, noting that Hinata and Sasuke were chatting now on her porch, the former probably having just arrived. Hey, he waved, receiving two in turn until he came to a stop just shy of the two. Morning, he greeted, which got an amused smile from Hinata. You look excited, she commented. Considering all we're doing today is going to the academy. Sasuke snorted at this notion. Please. We both know he's actually excited because you two are going to hear my awesome plan today. She beckoned the two inside, and Naruto's stomach growled. Neither of them actually knew why he was so excited this morning. He could smell Mikoto-sama's tamagoyaki from here. Ah, good morning, Naruto-kun, Hinata-chan. Mikoto greeted happily when the trio entered the kitchen. She threw an amused smile Naruto's way. I don't suppose I could interest you in allowing me to make your bento for lunch today? She wagered. Naruto beamed at her, unsealing his prepared lunch from a small, swirl-shaped seal on his wrist, courtesy of Jiraiya-sensei. Thank you, Mikoto-sama, but I've prepared one already. She scowled at him, then. What did I tell you about calling me that? His smile never faltered as he resealed it. Mikoto was the first woman he'd ever really gotten a motherly vibe from, and it was all too welcome. She seemed rather fond of him, too, which all three noticed rather quickly. Nobody had an explanation, granted. She stepped into the other room to prepare Sasuke's lunch, Hinata's undoubtedly being prepared earlier by a branch Hyuga. As the three sat down to eat, Sasuke straightened up a little bit, suddenly slipping into a slightly more serious mood. All right, she said finally, as Naruto stuffed his face. We're not really learning anything worth the effort of going to the academy, all of the theoretical stuff we could, and sometimes have learned at the library anyways. Both the brunette and the blonde, one's mouth more occupied than the other, nodded at this sentiment. Still, they weren't sure what they could do about it. It seemed like the academy was something they just had to endure. What they don't really tell you, Sasuke said eventually, is that there's no actual limitation that prevents you from taking the exam. It used to be done lots more often when the war and stuff was going on, but nothing has changed. Sputtering slightly as he tried to swallow his food fast enough to gasp out his question, you're not saying? Naruto managed a quick peek at the wide-eyed Hinata, the look on her face sufficient enough in telling him that she'd stumbled upon the same conclusion he had. Sasuke smirked deviously, folding her arms over her chest. And if I am? We're gonna graduate the academy today before the first day is even over. Following the confident swagger of the 7-year-old Uchiha down the street, the 6-year-old Uzumaki and Hyuga gave one another a more cautious glance. In Naruto's case, he wasn't really sure whether or not they were ready to be genin yet, but at the same time isn't that what the test's for? Part of him was actually painfully excited at the idea of getting to see what kind of stuff an actual ninja needed to be made of to pass. Hinata was less concerned about actually being ready, and more concerned about whether or not they could actually pass. Not too long ago, she would have devolved into a nervous wreck at the idea, and even now she still had a long way to go. More than anything, she wanted to make her family proud, and a black mark in the form of failing the genin test didn't sound like a good way to do it, even if she was only 6. But then, she wasn't actually concerned about any of her skills. As far as she was concerned, she was very capable. No, her concern was for the potential of any written part of the examination getting in their way. What good was their skill in the physical aspects of being a ninja, if they hadn't yet learned any mostly superfluous book smarts? She wasn't wholly dismissive of the curriculum as, for instance, her friend Naruto was. She could understand very well the need to learn history, as well as the necessity of political knowledge in the event a ninja needed to make an informed decision on a mission bordering another country. But still, nobody in their right mind actually knew exactly what velocity and angle a shuriken need to be thrown at to hit a target with a specific parabolic trajectory. Well, maybe Shikamaru and Sakura knew, but still, she sighed. Regardless of her feelings on the matter, Sasuke seemed perfectly confident, and Naruto had gone from looking just as confused and concerned as she was, to puffing up his chest and stealing his gaze. His unwavering confidence was one of the reasons she admired him so. Both him and Sasuke had an endless well of the stuff she benefited so much from drawing from. She eventually turned her eyes away from Naruto and towards Sasuke's back. If they thought their group was ready, so was she. Also, pragmatically, she understood that this was probably the only way they'd be guaranteed a spot on a team together, if they were the only 3 options that could be assigned. She wondered if her friends had considered this angle, but it wasn't like there was too much riding on this anyways. If they failed, they failed. She's never heard of anyone being denied permission to attempt to take the test again. But then again, she's never heard of anyone in this situation exactly. The details on Izumi's academy experience was pretty vague. Anyways, even if she wasn't quick to complain, she couldn't deny the merits of bypassing the already predictable bore of their academy days. Sorry, could you repeat that? Iruka-sensei looked more than a little shocked when the three of them arrived early, and crowded around his desk in an attempt to, as Sasuke said, hoped, get things over with before they had to do the annoying, somehow slower than usual introductory day. We'd like to take the graduation exam early, please. Sasuke reiterated, barely refraining from her trademark frown. Naruto almost chortled at seeing her hands twitched, like she was preparing to put them on her hips again. His dark-haired friend could have a very uniquely short temper, when she felt like it. Iruka nodded, blinked, that's what I thought you said. He admitted slowly, as if he were swirling the words around in his mouth, and came back with a bad taste. Seeing as you three are the only ones here now, he sighed. Go and take a seat. I'll pop by the headmaster's office and see if that's even still something we do, and his head shook. I'll be right back. The three marched up to the back of the class, and only then did Sasuke devolve into more childish mannerisms, practically squirming in her seat excitedly. If we graduate, I'll have done it even faster than Izumi, she said excitably, with a hint of smugness that relayed just how confident their friend really was to her two companions. Seated closest to the aisle, all she had to do was glance to her right to observe both of her friends, and when I master these her eyes flickered red the next time she blinked, before being deactivated shortly. She'd only just recently come to adjust to the information overload her dojutsu offered. Even so, the increased perception, chakra sensing, and intrinsic, eidetic memory her eyes granted her was still overwhelming, and it was best left activated when they'd actually be useful. The only time they were used needlessly was as a chakra control and building exercise. I'll do it before Zumi too. Yeah, well, Naruto chuckled as he leaned back in his seat, kicking his feet up on the desk between the two girls. If I had he said with a derisive sniff, I'd probably have mastered them already. He pretended to be unaware of the girl's glower, masking his smile with an indifferent, placid look. Maybe you do have them, Sasuke suggested, her features shrouded in unnatural, dark shadows provided by her long dark hair. You just need a traumatic enough experience, they say. Let's see if me shoving my foot up your, hey guys. Iruka returned then, unaware of the way Naruto gulped heavily when his chair clattered forward, and he seated himself properly. Apparently you can attempt it, there's no rule against it happening, but you should know a few things. All three perked up at this. For one, for early exam takers, the written portion of the exam is waived. Hinata perked up here. Maybe their goal was a lot more attainable than she'd first considered, but you'll have to go through a probationary period of a few months with your sensei before you can undertake missions, just to catch up on the information you'll miss. Her excitement dwindled quickly, before returning. Okay, so maybe their goal was a little more boring than she'd anticipated it'd be. Still, a probationary period was a lot better than having to go through a few more years of this. Second, class is about to start, so I can't really test you yet. You guys can either wait for me to do it later, or I was going to have a teaching assistant assigned to me this year. Perhaps he could administer it. Option 2, please, Naruto said hurriedly, and for good reason. He wasn't going to get any complaints from either of his companions. Great. Mizuki, please come in. Stepping into the room, the aforementioned teaching assistant appraised the three genin. His look was mostly neutral, an easygoing face framed by shoulder-length, white hair, and partially obscured by the forehead extender sewn into his bandana. Still, although the man looked neutral, something felt decidedly off about the man. Part of his senjutsu training was the fine-tuning of his natural, sensory abilities, and so he learned to trust his instinct when something was wrong. This guy just radiated wrong. Although he wasn't quite very skilled in it yet, if he wasn't mistaken, it almost felt like the man was leeching on the ambient, natural energy. But that was a strange notion regardless. He didn't know how to describe the way a natural sage would collect energy, more like simply accepting the flow, he supposed, but this wasn't the same. What that meant, he wasn't sure of, but he was beginning to second-guess his intent on getting things over with quickly. Come with me, you three. The man, Mizuki eventually instructed, walking off without waiting for them. Rushing off after the instructor, the three were led down winding hallways, with the white-haired shinobi occasionally glancing at his clipboard all the while. It looks like we'll start with shurikenjutsu first, he said finally, which was all well and good, and Sasuke seemed a little pleased, but it only took 2 more hallways for Naruto to pick up on something strange. Evidently, Sasuke felt the same, because her dojutsu came to life, and with a quiet gasp she muttered Kai, and tapped Naruto's shoulder. Recognizing the gesture, and blinking as the illusion was dispelled, he pressed his hand to Hinata's arm and channeled Sasuke's disruptive chakra into her, as well. The three found themselves facing Mizuki, who wore an amused smile. Just kidding. He chuckled. The first test, he informed, pushing open the door to head into the sprawling field behind the academy, was actually genjutsu, and you three passed with flying colors, although your friend here dispelled it for you. I get the feeling it wouldn't have been long before either of you noticed either. Besides that, it was difficult to suggest a Hyuga could fail to detect a genjutsu, when their eyes were so often used out in the field. Begrudgingly, it was clear that even with Naruto's likely relatively pitiful chakra control, he'd sensed something amiss. The tests afterward weren't anything to write home about, really. The tests regarding their skill in thrown weaponry ended predictably, as did Mizuki's gauging of their taijutsu skill, although none of them were too pleased about how rough he was with Naruto in particular. Even if Hinata and Sasuke initially chalked it up to the instructor going easy on them because they were girls, there was a pitifully easy test for each of them to locate Mizuki. With Naruto's frankly frightening amount of shadow clones, Hinata's Byakugan, and the scope of some of Naruto's tracking techniques he'd imparted into the Uchiha girl, there wasn't a chance they'd falter here. Between Naruto's shadow clones, again, acting as guards, Hinata's Byakugan, again, being able to sense him, and the Uchiha girl's aptitude for genjutsu, Mizuki was left disappointed in attempting to track them down as well, for the stealth portion of the exam. The Academy 3 were a slightly different story. It was clear that Mizuki was prepared to be adamant that clone alternatives weren't allowed, but the reasoning was more annoying than sound. Naruto could use the more advanced clone jutsu as if it had the lower relative draw of the simple bunshin, and the technique was more advanced because it was more useful in nearly every single way. Really, although Mizuki may have enjoyed nothing more than having the little QB brat flunk out, the exam was laughably easy for these children. He had no other option but to hand the three their forehead protectors, stupefied all the while. These kids, they're closer to toddlers than teenagers. Did they really just? How was he going to report this to the Hokage? Outside, after Sasuke insisted on checking in with Iruka-sensei to let him know they'd passed, and definitely not just to show off her latest fashion statement, they left the academy with Sasuke practically bouncing up and down the road. Wait until Tu-san hears about this, she squealed. And Ka-san, and Wani-san. It made Hinata just a little concerned. Would her father approve of this development? Her mother, she knew, would accept her unquestioningly and with open arms. The lack of a need to perform for her love was comforting. That didn't alleviate the issue. Unknown to either of them, Naruto walked along sedately with a small, contented smile. Sure, he couldn't wait to tell the old man, either of them, but that didn't matter in the slightest. I have all the approval I need right here. They did what? Mizuki fumbled for words awkwardly in front of the elderly Kage. It didn't help in the slightest that the man was now smoking like it was at risk of going out of style. It was beginning to get difficult to maintain eye contact through the haze. They requested to take the graduation exam early. Policies in place since the Third War have yet to be repealed, and so, Hiruzen Sarutobi clenched his eyes shut together tightly. Did this surprise him in the slightest? Not really monitoring the children's progress have eased some of the burden from his shoulders. As of late, it was increasingly clear that the next generation would be a strong one, and so long as he was able to instill the will of fire within them. But now, Naruto was his primary concern. His attachments to the village were few and far between. He'd banked on him all three of them making friends at the academy. Now, his hopes were dashed that any of them would be able to experience a somewhat normal childhood. Even if Hiruzen did strip them of their newfound ranks, it would only foster resentment he couldn't risk, and perhaps their skill was alienating enough to make Hiruzen's hopefulness foolhardy. Anyways, he missed the way Mizuki's mouth dried as the Hokage snapped his fingers, and an ANBU seemed to materialize from thin air next to him. Mizuki liked to believe that he was strong, that his abilities were being overlooked by incompetent administration. He hadn't even seen the ANBU move. Retrieve Miyazumi Uchiha, he directed, and then directed his gaze back to Mizuki as the masked subordinate vanished. I trust there's nothing else? There wasn't. Mizuki left, just minutes before the Uchiha heiress was brought before Hiruzen. The latter sighed deeply. All it took was one look at the girl to see. I see you haven't been brought up to speed regarding your younger sister and her friend's antics, he said, allowing some vague amusement to creep in. It seems your request has been approved a few years early. Effective immediately, you will be acting as the Jonin sensei of Team 7 consisting of Sasuke Uchiha, Naruto Uzumaki, and Hinata Hyuga. Naruto tugged at the hem of his green, long-sleeved undershirt as he and Hinata walked home. Dinner at Sasuke's was always interesting. Nerve-wracking, really? He couldn't say he had the best ever table manners or any at all, really. It was his two teammates that were his saviors though, without Hinata going through the motions slowly for him to imitate, or Sasuke kicking him under the table to remind him to just loosen up. It wasn't really all that much pressure though. Mikoto was very understanding, and Fugaku wasn't exactly a stickler, just intimidating. Tonight though, the Uchiha patriarch was over the moon about his youngest's early graduation, the next Team 7. It was apparently a big deal. It was that old pervert's team number, too. It was almost kind of annoying. His entire life, for as few short years as it may have spanned, he's had to deal with those eyes. The ones that didn't see him, but his burden. It's always been that way. He's always been judged because of something outside of his control, and it was like that here too. Would others look at them and fail to see Hinata, fail to see Sasuke, fail to see Naruto just because they were following in the Sanin's footsteps? Again, he would be judged for expectations alone, because Team 7 was important, because the QB was sealed within him. Was it like that for the Hokage too? For others to look and see the hat? He wanted nothing to do with any of it. He released a breath he didn't know he was holding, and unclenched the fist he didn't know he'd balled his hand up into when he felt Hinata's hand against his shoulder. Is something wrong? He shook his head, offering her a tiny smile. No, just excited. He lied because why bother her? Tomorrow, we'll really be ninja. Tomorrow, the words died on his lips. It was actually here, and in all honesty, he wasn't that excited. The only thing he really craved was to become stronger to protect his friends, and they were doing that before the academy even began. Throughout their first year, they learned more outside of the academy's walls than within. Would anything change, being lowly genin? How was learning from Izumi going to be different while it was official? He wasn't sure it would, but Hinata just smiled. I know how you feel. It doesn't feel like another step. Her pale eyes gazed up at the sky, where the dwindling sun had given way to dusky blue skies so dark it was nearly black. It feels like just the first. She had goals to attain, goals that would only be achieved with notoriety and rank to lead her clan into a new era. Her name would need to carry weight beyond leading via birthright alone. They eventually split, and Naruto took his time walking back home. People were few and far between so late, but still, if they ever had the misfortune of looking in his direction, it was always animosity or forced apathy. He smiled. They don't know. He still had the opportunity to show Konoha that he was Naruto. Just Naruto. Not Kyuubi, not a human sacrifice, not the next generation of the Sannin. Three groans chorused throughout the training ground. Team 7 now occupied. Izumi's smile, however, was blithe as the three children each produced a singular shadow clone, to match hers. It's necessary for you three to learn the history of the 5 great villages, she chastised gently. I know it's not exciting, which is why your clones will be going over some of this curriculum with mine, while we work on other, more practical skills. 4 clones departed, and their new sensei regarded the 3 of them evenly. All 3 of you, by now, have a reasonable grasp of the very basics new genin are expected to know, and more than that, too. Basic elemental manipulation and techniques like tree or water walking weren't expected of new graduates, let alone students that had only participated in the first year of the academy. Even knowing your chakra natures wasn't expected of newly minted genin, but all 3 of them did. Naruto, with the anomaly his dual natures presented, in the form of earth and water. Sasuke, who was strongly fire-attuned, and had aspirations to learn lightning release. Hinata, with her lightning nature, and intent to learn wind to round out their team. Up until this point, we've focused heavily on your strengths, but as of now, we'll be focusing on your weaknesses. Sasuke, you're very proficient in both long and mid-range techniques, but you're weakest in close-range engagements. Further training will help, of course, but there is an alternative. She reached for the hilt of her tanto, unsheathing it to offer the blade for the 3 children's inspection. You will be practicing kenjutsu with me, and this goes for all 3 of you. By the time you've become chunin, I expect that you'll all be proficient with at least one weapon aside from kunai, or shuriken. She resheathed the blade as her younger sister bounced excitedly where she sat, and she settled her gaze on the blonde-headed boy settled in the center of the trio. Naruto, you're currently the most well-rounded. The blush he sported was hidden with a slight bow of his head. Your chakra reserves and strong affinities for both earth and water will make you formidable at a distance, and for any that close the gap, your senjutsu will make for a very unwelcome surprise for any would-be enemy. However, none of this matters if you don't have the techniques to keep opponents at bay in the first place. This will be our focus. In addition, she continued, your capability with the shadow clone jutsu will be beneficial if you can learn to coordinate with large groups of them, without hampering either Hinata or Sasuke with numbers alone. Her parting words were simple before she spoke to Hinata. In the meantime, give some consideration to the weapon you'd like to train with. He didn't spare a second thought to the matter, imagining a certain wise, old grandfatherly figure and the stories he's heard about the man's skill. Would Bojutsu be okay? More than. She smiled. Now, Hinata. You're the most formidable of your team in the close range, but closing the gap between you and an opponent is your greatest weakness. I know that your clan may not. It's okay, sensei. She interjected. My clan will not be pleased if I rely too heavily on techniques other than my clan's, but I am Hinata before I am Hyuga. Her gaze slid toward her teammates, her friends. Before them, there was nothing but the clan. Now, she was certain it was possible to be more, to do more, and more than anything. I will not hold back my team from my clan's pride. Please teach me as you see fit. The teenager folded her arms across her chest, lips quirking upward slightly. She hadn't been that worried that Hinata would be averse to branching beyond her clan's bread and butter, but if there were any lingering doubt the young heiress would succumb to pressure, it was dispelled now. Of course. But let's not be so hasty yet. We have options available to us that will remediate some of the issues with your clan's short-range specialty without abandoning your roots entirely. I have a friend that will be able to assist you in mastering the Shunshin. Like the Sharingan, I suspect your eyes will help overcome some of the shortcomings of the body flicker technique, and when mastered, she spoke no more in regards to that. She's seen her best friend, Shursui the teleporter, in action. Imagining a Hyuga with the gentle fist utilizing the basic technique to such a degree was terrifying. Moving on, most short-range weaponry will make it next to impossible to also utilize the Juken. For that reason, we'll look into long-range options for you. After her assessment of the 3, she created 2 more clones. Aside from our training regimen moving forward, consider yourselves lucky. It's tradition for most genin teams to complete a mandatory number of D-ranked missions, which amount to essentially basic labor to strengthen the civilian perception of Konoha shinobi. However, any goodwill gained in having you three perform such missions will be lost due to how young the three of you are. She snuck a glance Naruto's way. Unspoken, further, was the general public opinion of the young Jinchuriki. Child labor, and the presence of the village pariah would foster no relationship between village and shinobi. What are C-rank missions like? When can we go on one? Can we go on one now? Izumi rubbed at the back of her neck. Well, you see, Izumi Uchiha was plainly scary. Naruto whipped beads of sweat from his brow as he rested carefully on the branch of an unharmed tree. Not that the same could be said for much of the forestry around them. Large-scale earth and water techniques had reshaped the immediate area, and certainly not for the better. He tried to calm himself. It was annoying that he wasn't putting on the showing he'd hoped, the way their new sensei had phrased it. The three were too important to the village for the Hokage to immediately send them outside of the village. While the elderly Kage might acknowledge their skill, age was a factor, too, so it was their sensei's sole judgment, whether or not they ever actually took their first mission. He almost allows himself to relax when he felt a hand land on his shoulder, and every muscle he had went taut. Second time I've caught you, the girl behind him muttered matter-of-factly, as if speaking too loud might disrupt the now gently swaying branch both were resting on. In the field, do you know what that means? He forced himself to swallow, despite his bone-dry throat. It means, she continued, that you failed your team. He was wrenched from the branch, but he suspected this was the girl's way of giving him a head start for round 3. He righted himself, hands and feet sticking to the trunk of a still-standing tree opposite his opponent. Naruto made 2 clones even as she spoke, smoke billowing from them as he poured excess chakra into the technique. In any other situation, it'd be a massive waste to create this much smoke from the simple creation of a Kage Bunshin was inefficient, to say the least. But here, it did have some advantages. He felt more than he heard the creak of the branch as Izumi leapt from it, and the clone that had dropped to the ground needed no communication to begin weaving hand signs, before slamming both palms onto the ground. The ground seemed to ripple like the rolling tide, toppled trees and helpless flora sinking slowly beneath the wide swathe of chakra-laden mud. It was a simple, if much lesser variant of Jiraiya's Swamp of the Underworld's technique, which the old lecher refused to teach him yet because it was too dangerous. Yet another advantage of cover, it seemed hiding the brief, annoyed scowl of the original war. The smoke shield also had distinct disadvantages. Leaping nimbly from protruding tree, to rolling log, to upturned stone, she had little trouble in traversing the veritable earthen lake the ground had become. Her limited knowledge born of Naruto's use of the technique in the past allowed her to infer a few things. 1. He couldn't have begun the jutsu without contact with the ground, so sometimes after he'd created the Kage Bunshin, either he or the clone had dropped from the tree he was perched on. 2. The technique was still growing, and for that to be the case, someone had to still be feeding it chakra, connected to the technique at the epicenter. Her lips curled upwards as the clone on the ground dispelled around a fist. Above then, and she took the opportunity to ascend the tree. The smoke was thinning now, just enough for her to watch her prey push himself away from the tree. Leaping after him, if she were any other opponent in any other circumstance, could have been a fatal mistake. She watched her pupil twist to face her in the air, a deep breath seeming to suck the moisture from the air around him. Her tanto flickered outward to deflect the cutting jet of water spewed forth, but in any other situation this defense would have been insufficient. Both of them knew either would use a potentially fatal technique, and so the water jet was both lower powered and too broad to be fully effective. She's seen accomplished water release users cut through steel with ease, and the fact that Naruto could utilize the humid air was testament to the fact that he was no slouch. Ultimately, she had strong enough fire techniques in her arsenal that she would have mitigated the attack if necessary, but the fact that he had turned the pursuit on her came with a twinge of pride. But it didn't take her long to realize something was off. It was true that taijutsu was likely his weakest area, not to speak of genjutsu, a thought that had a cold chill run through her, in remembrance of previous lessons with the blonde boy. But being close range limited some of the techniques she relied on to close the gap between them all the same. He was staying close to her intentionally, doing his best to avoid her without putting enough distance between them to risk Izumi whipping out any shuriken, wire, or low-powered fire techniques. Her dark eyes widened in realization, and she palmed a kunai an instant later, whipping it at Naruto. Let it be known that despite her gut feeling, she'd never risk an injury on a whim, and so the spinning kunai was thrown such that when it struck him, it'd be the pommel sinking into his abdomen. He was no match for her aim. That was a clone too? Now, where had he gotten off to? Hinata couldn't believe her sensei was torturing her with nothing more than a crude circle she'd carved into the soil with a stick. Hinata, or more correctly, a shadow clone, watched on as her original found herself face down in the soil again. Excellent Shunshin, Hinata, her sensei encouraged. However, the landing could be improved. The body flicker was a very imprecise technique useful mostly for its rapid movement. Every shinobi, to some degree, utilizes the Shunshin naturally. Anyone with large enough reserves subconsciously used the excess life force to strengthen both their body and mind, and if that was a 1 on the scale, utilizing the body flicker was like an 11. It was a controlled burst of chakra meant to do nothing more than augment you for long enough to cross a vast distance in an instant. Safe landings weren't always a guarantee, but Izumi said she had a cousin that had mastered it to the point that the drawbacks, namely disorientation and tunneled vision, were no longer an issue. Unfortunately, today he was not available, and so the first step on the road to mastery was throwing herself at a wide circle until she could consistently land in it. Right now, she'd take just being able to land on her feet. Hinata's clone turned to her counterpart, her sensei's. They both sat kneeled on the ground, just meters apart. The earth-style technique I'm going to teach you is used to harden your body until it's near impenetrable. I know that some of the most skilled users are only capable of being physically harmed by lightning-style attacks. Her hand started with the snake hand seal. Seeing that Hinata was paying attention both to her words and movement, she continued next with Ox. For now, because you're still a novice in earth-based techniques, the only ones Hinata had in her arsenal were purely for utility. For instance, she'd started with a technique Izumi showed them to compact the soil and eliminate the lingering scent of campsites and impromptu bathroom breaks, which all three children had found hilarious at the time. We'll be working on the lesser version of the technique, which requires actual stone. If you get good enough, eventually you'll be able to harden your skin with nothing more than earth-natured chakra. Bore. Izumi reached for the soil, her hand passing through the earth like it was water. When her hand returned, it was coated in a thin layer of hardened stone. She wriggled her fingers. Aside from being thin, it seemed as if it hardly hampered her movement if at all. Without Hinata realizing, the Uchiha brought a kunai down on her splayed-out hand, eliciting a strangled gasp from the younger girl until she realized her shock was for naught. The sharp blade was deflected with little more than a few sparks for her effort. When you fight an opponent with a weapon, this was her biggest concern regarding Hinata. Facing an opponent with enough reach to stay beyond the girl's minuscule striking distance, and close enough to prevent Hinata from prepping anything else, was a very unfavorable position for near any Hyuga. This is why many of their clan techniques were designed to be done without seals, such as the Kaiten, which Hinata did know, and the vacuum palm, which she didn't. Her student would have more to rely on than just those options. This technique will make it possible for you to fight on even ground. Hinata was already picturing that herself, how devastating it would be for an unaware opponent to believe a strike would have the best of the Hyuga, only to have their blade deflected, momentum carried forward, and a palm pressed against any of the major tenketsu in their chest. She wasted no time attempting it herself, face squeezed into a grimace when the lumpy, sludgy soil wasn't the same consistency as her sensei's had been. Actually, it reminded her of the roux her mother had tried to make alongside dinner the night before. To Hinata, her mother was perfect in every single way, so she tried her best to call her mother's culinary mishaps kitchen experiments. She did miss her father's cooking fiercely though, which she'd always remembered being comfort foods and late nights curled up in his lap while he toiled over scrolls. When she pulled her hands free, earth came with barely. It was more muck than hardened stone, falling back to the ground with a wet thud. Not bad for a first try. Her sensei asked? Hinata groaned, and she wasn't the one face-planting with every failed shunshin. Let it be known that her sister was evil. First of all, Sasuke was being made to practice with the too heavy wooden mimicry of a tanto, or baken. Only, this one was so terribly rounded and dull it was more like a hickory baton, and she was sweating through her shirt, and dark hair was sticking to her face and throat. It didn't help that her scrawny arms and shoulders burned with exhaustion and strain, or that her dear eldest sister was just sitting Saiza and calling out instructions. This had all begun with Izumi forming a small pool of water and submerging her hands. With a light application of wind chakra, she was able to send bubbles floating from the small water source, which her younger sister was expected to thrust the bakken through, fast and precise. It wasn't easy with the uncertain air currents and semi-random movements the bubbles made, and without her Sharingan to boot it was annoying, and it was apparently important to build muscle in the right places, and the heft of the mock blade was to make certain that she wielded her future tanto as if were weightless, in comparison. Now, she was running drills at her sister's instruction, stroking a poor wooden post with abandon. She was taking a breather now though, probably while her sister cooked up something new to torture her with. Now, she was being made to hold her weapon at the ready, gripping the hilt loosely with every finger except for her pinky. Holding it like this, for this long, was actually surprisingly strenuous. But, right. Her bakken flickered to life, screwing her face up in concentration to bring the sword. Left, diagonal slice. Overhead. The second wood struck wood, she used the momentum to bring her weapon around, to let it. Sloppy. Her sister called. It has to flow seamlessly. You can't. She watched as her younger sister lost her balance, collapsing bonelessly to the ground as her hands throbbed and he pushed herself up. Her elder sister smiled sheepishly. We can take 5. It was no surprise that her younger sister's dark head shook vehemently. No. I can continue. She was proud, if a little worried about the work ethic of her devoted little ninja. Maybe they needed hobbies. Do you believe they're ready? I do. The Hokage sighed, glancing at the paintings of his predecessors, and the man that was meant to succeed him. I might have something for you, he murmured thoughtfully. It should be low stakes enough not to bring them any harm, while having a diverse enough climate to get them used to the various elements. Izumi nodded. She was initially worried that because of the age and status of their team, they'd be coddled and cooped up within fire country. Not that it was especially common for leaf shinobi to venture to countries besides wind, but still, and expose them early to the realities of this line of work. The words tasted bitter on his tongue. Return tomorrow for your team's assignment. Be packed for at least 2 weeks. Tomorrow, Team 7 will be deployed to Kenri village. Izumi explored the apartment slowly. It was modest and sparsely furnished, messy but not cluttered. She noted the way dust clung to the highest surfaces and some, not so high. Her dark eyes studied the chair pushed up against the counter, right before the microwave, and the way that a cursory inspection of the cabinets revealed none of the pots or pans within had next to no signs of use. How many times had this stovetop even been used? Her stomach churned with unease when she pulled open the fridge and freezer. There was nothing basic. It was all ready-made meals meant to be heated and consumed in the span of a few minutes. Meant to be convenient, if not tasty nor nutritious. How could a child live like this, alone? She eased her way toward the single bedroom, with silent footfalls and a careful test of the bedroom door. No creak. The room was dark, predictably, but the curtains weren't drawn, and so the dusky, early morning light helped. Not that it was necessary, few have more keen sight than an Uchiha, and even if that weren't the case, the room was not nearly as messy as the rest of the home. It was surprisingly tidy even. She stood beside the bed, above the bundled-up form beneath the sheets, a hand reaching. When she tugged the covers back, the blond boy vanished with a puff of smoke. Wide blue eyes peeled out from beneath the bed, alight with mirth, and staring up at his sensei triumphantly. I got you this time. The blank look on her face took much of the wind out of his sails, however, as she crouched down and reached out a hand. My foolish young pupil, she mumbled, two fingers brought together to poke at his forehead. You were too hasty in revealing yourself. Her form rippled before dispersing, a glance at the door revealing her standing within the frame, arms crossed and a distinctly smug smile pulling at her lips. Naruto rolled fully out from beneath the bed, springing to his feet. Genjutsu was so annoying. Still, his spirits couldn't be dampened too heavily. Izumi popping in and testing them like this was an increasingly frequent occurrence, ever since some of their team's nights were spent camping out in Konoha's forests to get them used to being out and actually in the field. He was glad for it though, the small skills, like getting used to keeping watch. He was surprised by just how hard it was to keep himself awake past his typical bedtime, but he was getting better. Just like this test. Izumi said that a shinobi should be able to wake at the drop of a pin, and come to alertness without cluing a would-be assailant in on the fact that they were now awake. Naruto had been the worst at it at first, since Sasuke lived with their sensei and was the one most familiar with her sister's lessons. Hinata, too, had the benefit of training in a clan that started training their children earlier than even the Uchiha. But if he'd just been patient today, maybe. Did you remember to pack everything you need? His gears shifted instantly, and he ducked back beneath the bed to heft out a somewhat unreasonably large scroll, just a little longer than one of Naruto's thighs. All in here, he confirmed, before drawing it behind his back to mock it being secured there. Izumi chuckled. Now who does that remind me of? Pervy-sensei got it for me. His grin was wide. It was clear he took no small amount of pleasure in mimicking the Sanin's appearance. He ducked, again, pulling with him a long, red and black coat. The toads made this for me, too. Or I mean, Ma did. But she made it a little too big cause she wanted me to grow into it. Oh? She moved closer, coming to sit on the edge of his bed and beckoning for him to hand over the scroll. When he did, she split her attention between listening to him and giving the packed contents a quick once-over. When did you get that? It looks good on you. He flushed and scratched at a whiskered cheek. Well, actually I got it as a reward for mastering Sage Mode and learning Frog Kata. I was gonna show you guys Sept. He palmed at his face. Jiraiya said I have to wear it anytime I fight, and use Sage Mode. It's obligation? She supplied, to his relief. But I'm always in Sage Mode. So he said I could just wear it if I needed to summon someone like Bunta. Izumi laughed at the mental imagery, though she suspected the old toad sage was just pulling her student's leg. Well then, just in case we'd better bring it along too. Gamabunta for a C-rank? He giggled. Gamabunta was more likely to be offended if he was summoned for a measly C-rank mission. It's more a Kichi job, I think. Izumi knew enough to suspect that Gamabunta was a boss summon, but all of them were familiar with both Gamakichi and Gamatatsu. Don't underestimate the mission, she admonished gently, receiving a simple smile in turn as he handed over the coat. I know, I just think you're underestimating Gamakichi is all. He took the scroll back and set it on top of his bed. I'll meet you all at the Hokage Tower after I finish getting ready, he suggested, only to find his forehead poked again. I don't think so. My mother is expecting to be feeding 3 genin today, though, and get bathed. I'll be right here. Many assumed that the Byakugan was a constant, 360-degree field of vision, while activated. Fewer are aware that the truth is that the Byakugan is far more versatile than even this explanation gives it credit for, capable of being focused and pointed to extend its range. This was a technique employed by every branch Hyuga that was assigned to guard the compound, because for all that the Hyuga were, they were also very strict on privacy. It meant that actually infiltrating the Hyuga compound was a simple matter. Wait for the guards to take their rest. Alternating activating and deactivating their dojutsu at 15-minute intervals was standard. Once you make it past the perimeter, you're at no risk of being spotted unless caught via natural means. Of course, Izumi didn't need to go through all of the trouble. As Hinata's sensei, it was well within her rights to drop in on her student as she saw fit. Still, practice never hurt anybody. She dropped from Hinata's window, crossing the room silently to find herself at the side of Hinata's bed. Before her hand reached the child's shoulder, 2 pale eyes sprung open to regard her sensei hopefully. How'd I do? When I opened the window, there was a brief flare of chakra when you activated the Byakugan. I understand your reasoning, however. Hinata scowled and shifted to sit up in her bed, and shimmy down onto the floor. An accomplished censor would have been able to tell. What a stupid mistake. Are we leaving now? Hinata wondered, to a shake of Izumi's head. Not yet. Bring me the scroll you've sealed your supplies in for me to look over while you get ready. After you let your parents know you're leaving, we'll all be having breakfast together before we head to the Hokage's tower. She smiled at the much more appropriately sized scroll set in her hands, unfurling it to begin her once-over while her pupils scurried off to prepare for their first C-ranked mission. It was at the gates of the Uchiha compound that the clone with Hinata dispersed, when she met up with the original and Naruto. She led the two at a sedate pace, but it was quickly becoming clear that the two were anything but. What do you think we're going to be doing? The whispers were low and excitable. Search and rescue? Saving a princess? Stopping a corrupt shipping magnate? Peace in the middle. The two were brought to a stop by their sensei's laughter. Temper your expectations. I don't think we'll be doing anything so grand. Then, she teased, yet she was a little more somber at what she suspected the last guess was. As part of their recent academic curriculum, Izumi was expected to teach them. They'd learned about the war-torn Amigakure. Restoring peace to the centermost region of the elemental nations was a noble goal, if a little outside of their capabilities right now. Sasuke joined her friends excitedly, waiting on the porch by the time the three arrived, and practically bouncing from one foot to the next. What took you guys so long? We probably have a missing need to handle. An excited glance between the two visitors communicated their sentiment exactly. IHSDN thought of that. Not that they got much time to, before the youngest Uchiha pulled them inside. 5 sets of eyes, not including the A&B guard, were staring at the map unfurled atop the Hokage's desk. Hiruzen Sarutobi reached forward, a finger grazing their intended destination. This, here, is Kenri village. It was the 3 children that were most curious, trying to draw themselves as high up as dignity would allow. None of them dared to get up onto the tips of their toes. It's located on the border of the lands of fire and water, though it resides firmly in our country. Typically, even for a relatively minor C-ranked mission, I'd never send a team of genin so close to the border of another country. Do the 3 of you understand why I'm making an exception now? It was Hinata that spoke up first. Kiri is currently in the midst of a civil war? She wagered. How could Kiri properly secure their borders whilst fighting among themselves? Sasuke added to this assessment, reaching forward to trace a finger along the map. Kiri's territory near this part of the border is mostly coasts, too. She spoke more confidently than she felt, but felt her reasoning was sound. As it was mostly coasts, it was unlikely Kiri had any significant loyalist or rebel presence near this part of fire and water countries' shared border. No small smile crept onto Hiruzen's face. Correct, well done both of you. Now, as for the details of your mission in full. When all 4 were stood at attention, he folded his hands before his lips and continued with his amusement firmly hidden on his lips. The small town of Kenri has been plagued recently with a string of murders. However, it's the circumstances of each death that necessitated the Leaf Village's involvement. Every body recovered thus far has been entirely drained of chakra. It wasn't like corpses continued to produce chakra, but the rate at which a cadaver lost its stored reserves was remarkably slow. Even the long-dead Shodaime likely still had chakra reserves to burn through. Civilians? Naruto couldn't help but interject. It just wouldn't make sense if they were. Why would someone go through the trouble of draining the meager reserves of any average civilian? Hiruzen's head bobbed stiffly. Yes, I understand your confusion. However, he was reluctant to produce the few images he had stashed away, but with a heavy sigh, he passed them along to Izumi, who shared them with her charges. There were a few collective gasps as they all studied the photos. Multiple bodies, all stripped bare and laid face down on hastily made cots for preliminary investigations. There were a few details common between the 3 pictures they had available. For one, there were a series of puncture wounds all dotting the same places on the back of every victim. What is this? Sasuke asked, or more correctly, why? The puncture wounds you see are all precisely where the 8 inner gates are located. Hiruzen spoke solemnly. The 8 inner gates are chakra limiters, which regulate not just the flow, but the production of chakra. Unleashing these inner gates, as I'm sure you all may have learned, would make it possible for even a civilian to briefly attain power similar to a Kage. But utilizing the 8th gate always results in certain death. What Hiruzen didn't say, of course, is that a civilian using the 8th gate without having properly conditioned their body would tear themselves apart at the seams before they could ever land a punch. If it were somehow possible they were conscious through the pain. None of them needed to hear that now. Don't expect a warm welcome from the town when you arrive. The preliminary investigation was conducted by a third party, and have commissioned this mission on behalf of the village. I'd wondered, Izumi admitted, how a place so small could put together the money for a C-ranked mission. Hiruzen laughed merrily at that. I'm sure finances for Kenri are not the concern, here. Their location has given them a monopoly of a very unique export, which is why a third, interested party has commissioned us. After composing himself once more, Hiruzen straightened up. Team 7. Your mission is to investigate the murders happening near Kenri village, and if possible, apprehend whomever is responsible. If you encounter hidden Miss Shinobi, I expect all of you to immediately return to Konoha. Do you understand why? It was Naruto that responded. Because the only Kiri shinobi we'd run into would be fleeing, missing nin, hunter ninja, or a group that might be suspicious of hidden lead ninja sticking our nose in their civil war? Aside from refugees, the only shinobi likely to be spotted on the wrong side of the border would be potentially dangerous missing nin. Worse, and thankfully nowhere near as likely, if they encountered a cell of Kiri loyalists or rebels, they ran the risk of a volatile response suspecting Konoha was supporting the enemy faction, and causing a diplomatic incident wasn't outside of the realm of possibility in the slightest. Their Hokage laughed again. I see the history lessons for you three are paying off. Good, I expect all of you to do myself, and the village proud. Hi, Hokage-sama. When the four of them left, he sighed and rubbed at his eyes. Oh, how he wished Biwako was here to see these kids. She'd be so pleased to see how well the next generation was shaping up. Oh well. He'd just tell her when she came for lunch. Naruto had no clue how Hinata could look so excited after everything they'd gone through, which wasn't much, to be fair, but nobody had told him just how humid it was going to get. He was fine with heat, so long as it was the drier sort. This was just torture. He was glad to see that at least Sasuke understood his plight, but Izumi looked like she wasn't even bothered in the slightest. We're going to take a break for a while and begin another basic, elemental transformation exercise. She came to hand the 3 leaves, which made it apparent quickly why his pale-eyed friend was so excited. They were finally going to be learning some supplementary wind techniques. The reason I've been able to stay so cool, Izumi spoke, is because I'm carefully using water and wind chakra to help my body cool. That's how your body naturally cools itself when your sweat evaporates. It takes some of your body's heat with it. This method is a lot cleaner though. She shook her near-empty canteen of water at the 3 of them. More dangerous, too. If I don't constantly drink water while doing this, I could seriously harm myself, remember that. With her final word of warning, she sat across from them and pressed a leaf between her palms, to demonstrate how a successful execution of the leaf-cutting exercise should look. The closer they got to Kenri, the more Naruto noticed something strange. It was a gradual sort of thing, but he started to notice minor details: how heavily some trees were packed with shelves of fungal fruiting bodies, or just how common mushrooms were beginning to get. It wasn't until he saw the first tree-sized fungal fruiting body that he realized something was up. It was notable enough for even their sensei stopped to regard the anomaly, and a mildly concerned look crossed her features. I'm beginning to wonder about that export, she murmured before they were off again. He began to notice other things too. Just how high they were getting, because every time he looked at the ground, it seemed further away. How light his body has become, his footing no longer certain. It didn't take more than 2 stumbles for Hinata to glance over at him between leap from branch to branch. Are you okay? The simple question was enough to bring the group to a complete halt, the Uchiha pair leading the group regarding him with concern. What's wrong? He blinked rapidly, looking down at the far-off ground, and then at the branch. His breath came out a strangled gasp when he realized the wood was writhing, almost shifting in his hands. When had they gotten so red? It was like all the blood within his veins had risen to the surface to tint his tan skin. He stumbled backwards and nearly fell. What's? Izumi was at his side in an instant, her hands cupping his cheeks. Calm down, she soothed, fingers climbing upwards to pry at his eyelids, a frown tugging at her typically placid features. Naruto, did you forage for any food when we stopped before? She doubted it, because all 3 of them were extremely well versed in the species of plants and fungi that were safe to consume within the land of fire. It was a vehement shake of his head that confirmed this belief, and yet, what's wrong with him? Sasuke pressed, and Izumi sighed. I have a hunch, Izumi ended, but I don't know how it happened. Is it serious? Hinata pried. We should head back to the village. That won't be necessary, Izumi assured. Assuming I'm correct, it's temporary. I'm guessing that come morning, he'll be back to normal, but until then, she released the blonde, turning and gazing up at the sky. We don't have much daylight left. Let's make it to the village. I'll explain more once we're there. Naruto was too dazed to protest being helped onto Izumi's back. They were a unique spectacle to the closely knit villagers of Kenri. It didn't help that the 2 youngest girls were glancing over worriedly at the only male member, who walked unsteadily with the support of a hand on his Jonin sensei's flak jacket. It was his insistence that he walk. Despite the initial noise of protest his shimmying off sparked in Izumi's throat. To some degree, however, he was correct. It was important, especially with the age of them, to make a good first impression. He was trying his best, at least, but it was hard to even conceive what acting normal might look like. His best approximation of it now was watching his footsteps, and not the dancing blades of grass, or the crisp, fresh taste the color green brought to his tongue, not the massive mushroom that towered above the village's center taller than any local tree, with mesmerizing gills beneath the fruiting body's cap. Despite the Hokage's concern it might be the opposite, they were greeted rather warmly by the town's mayor, Takashi. They were seated in his dining room, as his wife prepared dinner. It's good to see that you have all arrived safely, he spoke, once he was seated across from Team 7. We were told you'd be coming, and we've prepared lodging for the 4 of you while you're with us. He gave them all a curious glance, specifically the children and the headbands they wore. His gaze lingered on Naruto. Thank you for your hospitality. Is there anything you might be able to tell us that will assist us in our investigation? Takashi's head shook sadly. Unfortunately, no. Everyone in this village knows everybody, it's just hard to believe that any of our own could possibly have a hand in this. Our suspicion was that bandits were responsible for attacking merchants along nearby trade routes, and we'd hoped that the party the daimyo sent might have solved the issue. His smile was a touch rueful. Clearly, it's not so simple. Any resource you may need, you're welcome to. I apologize in advance if my people are a touch skittish around ninja. Izumi understood, dismissing the apology quickly. Your village produces psychoactive mushrooms, correct? Takashi smiled pleasantly. Yes, you're mostly accurate. I'd say it's less that we produce anything with nature, there's a bit of give and take. Then, Izumi pressed, do you have any idea how one might be able to suppress, or stop the effects? It was immediate, the way his gaze snapped back to the blonde, and he chuckled softly. I figured there was something in his eyes, I should have known. Unfortunately, I can't help you there, there's no way you're going to be able to stop the effects now. The good news is that you'll find it's really quite harmless, especially in small amounts, and he'll be fine by the time he wakes so long as he's careful about the mushrooms he forages for. He didn't consume anything like that, Hinata insisted. Takashi quirked an eyebrow. Are you sure? Simply put, there's no other way it could have happened. The spores produced by our mushrooms don't contain anything active. We're sure, Sasuke said plainly. Interesting. Well, in any case, sleep is the remedy you're after. If you all plan on working overnight, I can send someone to watch over him, someone trained to guide the experience, and make sure it'll be a positive one. We'll be beginning our investigation in the morning. With Izumi putting a cork in that idea, they left shortly before Takashi's family interrupted for dinner. Their lodgings were modest enough. There wasn't much to speak of, there was almost no furniture in the single-bedroom home. It was a pleasant surprise that the small kitchen adjoined to the living space had a table for them to sit at. The floor, even with their sleeping bags laid out, wasn't an ideal surface for them to sleep on during the duration of the mission, but being so close to Kiri meant that rain came down on Kenri frequently. She couldn't complain about an uncomfy wooden floor while they were being sheltered from the elements. They were rather insulated from the village proper, as well, which Izumi considered fairly beneficial. In a town this small, before Izumi could do any reconnaissance, she wanted a feel for the typical traffic the town got. It might be too suspicious if they were to arrive, and a curious stranger, however deceptive her henge may be, was prying too much. No, she'd save that until they had more information to work with, until their presence on the outskirts of the village was no longer at the forefront of the people's minds. Both Izumi and Hinata heard a peal of laughter from the bedroom as they worked on the stove. It was an impromptu lesson in many regards, from having her pupil light the burner with a fire technique, to shaping stone cookware if a touch misshapen and crude. Now these lessons would continue to serve her students throughout their careers. Of course, she had cookware sealed away, but how would they learn from that? Do you see the way the water's boiling? Aside from the stoneware pan, they had a pot filled with water. Now that it's boiling, turn the stove down to low and add the rice you washed. It wasn't hard to tell that Hinata was distracted, with the strained, small smile on her face and the hesitation in following Izumi's instruction, but she carried on regardless. Now, after we cover it with the lid, don't touch it at all. In 15 minutes we can remove it from the heat completely, and it'll be finished steaming after another 10. As predicted, they hadn't gone far into preparing their caught trout. It would be simple, but she planned on preparing it shiojaki style, or simply salted and grilled. Before Hinata spoke up. Is Naruto going to be okay? The end product leaned more heavily into the taste of the fish rather than herbs or other additives, but it'd be delicious nonetheless. Izumi sighed. She had promised the two more information when they got situated, but Sasuke was still helping Naruto settle in. Probably. Naruto had settled into a more pleasant mood than the initial shock and fear, and now next to everything was hilarious in some way to the boy. It was all still concerning, but she couldn't help a smile. Yes. After we eat and sleep, he'll be fine. It was almost scary how good he felt. It wasn't just the comfort, the warmth of the bedding encompassing him. It wasn't just the presence of one of his best friends. Only friends, whispered a tiny voice in the furthest recesses of his mind, or the sheer absurdity of everything happening. His laughter as he wrestled with his own bedroll. When had it gotten so big? It was as if the thing had doubled, tripled in size since the last time it was sealed. It wasn't just the strange, seemingly ethereal glow his teammates now held when he glanced at them, or the mirth in Sasuke's eyes, or the glint of her wide, pearly white smile. He wasn't happy because her hair flowed and flickered like black flames, curling and writhing as if every hair moved of its own accord, or just how soft it felt when he timidly asked if he could touch it. He was just happy default. Even when he clapped his hands over his eyes and forced his mind to blank, to not think of his friends or any of the old men, Hiruzen, Jiraiya, Tochi, being away from the village, those stairs. Still happy. Then she left. One moment, excusing herself to join the others in the kitchen and leaving him to his own devices. It was as if her absence had stolen the light from the room, and his good mood mellowed. Without the distraction of his friend, without her parroting terrible jokes Fugaku-sama had apparently passed along as good-natured fatherly humor, he was left to think. It was still confusing how all of this had happened. He knew with certainty he never consumed anything except for the same field rations his teammates had, and yet, it was annoying too, that he was being a burden now. Apparently he'd be better come morning, but that didn't excuse his shameful showing as a member of their team, in front of the village leader, no less. How was he supposed to protect those important to him, if he ended up incapacitated on even their first mission outside of the village. Naruto squashed the frustration, the spark of anger that rushed through him. He refused to be a burden to any one of his friends. This was going to be the first step. As Hinata had said before, he was going to prove himself to the ones he cared about, and one day, he'd prove his worth to the village too. That night, his dreams were strange. The first thing he noticed upon waking was that he was somewhere unfamiliar. He couldn't help this instinct being hammered into his head by Izumi, and so while he pretended to remain asleep and stretched his senses outward, he took stock of the situation. Perhaps most evident was the water lapping at his legs, or the sand he was laying on. Am I at a beach? His heart threatened to leap out of his chest so quickly it was almost painful. The only coasts near Kenri were within water country. Had they been captured and? No. At least, it didn't seem that way. He sensed no live human chakra signatures on the island. Live being the operative term, because while not 100% certain, there were two bodies of water that seemed to radiate human chakra just without the human part. There was also a monstrous chakra signature coming from somewhere near the peak of the island, and he knew it to be an island because stretching out his senses far enough told him that land stopped and ocean began again. He couldn't recall the map showing any islands nearby, but perhaps there was one unmarked? He sat up, confident he had a reasonable grasp of the situation he was in, even if the most important details were unknown to him. Where was his team? He clutched at his head with a strangled gasp as he attempted to strain his senjutsu-bolstered sensory abilities. The ocean was vast, too large and too deep to comprehend every last animal he was resonating with. Trying to push himself too hard would only end in a headache. Besides, he got the gist. Wherever the mainland was, there was no way he would be getting there without some sort of assistance, without better options available to him, and to ward off the creeping concern, he set off for the larger of the two human chakra signatures. There was one certainty he refused to budge on. He was going nowhere near whatever the hell he was sensing near the island's peak. Whatever he'd hoped to find, it wasn't a waterfall pouring into a near-placid lake near the center of the island. Cursory inspection of the water told him that it was devoid of life, but more concerning than that, he couldn't tell if this body of water had a bottom. It was a vast, abrupt drop straight down into a seemingly endless abyss, but aside from that it all seemed relatively normal as it could be. He kneeled near the edge of the water. Here, holding a hand out just above the surface spoke volumes of the energy trapped within the water. It practically vibrates. A full hum that traveled from his hand to the tips of his toes and top of his scalp. Curiosity won out. He dipped his hand within the soothing warmth of the body of water, but nothing seemed to happen. He was so confused that he missed the appearance of another person, tugging at his senses. He didn't miss the gasp, or the shock of red when his head swiveled to face the person that seemed to have appeared from thin air. He didn't miss the tears welling up in her eyes, or the breathless, confused, "Naruto, my baby is that is." He snatched his hand from the water and scrambled to stand up, but the moment his fingers left contact with the lake, the red-headed woman flickered and vanished. What if Naruto has Mokuton and chakra chains? And thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoyed this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel, and leave a like if you guys need the next part. Comment down and thanks for watching the video, and see you guys in the next video.